Hi, I'm Candace Malcolm, and this is the Candace Malcolm Show. We are live, and it is debate night. Finally, the moment that so many of us have been waiting for, the one and only English debate in this election cycle. Of course, we had the French debate last night, and wow, what a night. What a night for, first of all, Pierre Poilievre, who really just seemed calm and relaxed and delivered what he needed to do. There were no real knockout punches, but I suspect that was deliberate because tonight is the night that really matters for Pierre Poilievre. Like the best he could have done last night is maybe, pick up a few percentage points in Quebec, not really going to lead to a lot of seats. But tonight is the big night that really matters for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. He has to win over centrist voters basically in and around Toronto, in the GTA, in the 905, in Ontario. That is where this election will be decided. So I imagine that Pierre Poilievre sort of reserved his best lines and his knockout punches for tonight. So we are very, very excited about this debate. I'm pleased tonight to be joined by the same co-host we had last night for the French language debate. And that, of course, is David Knight-Legg. David is a political advisor and consultant based in Calgary, Alberta. So David, thanks for joining us again.
Great to be here.
Well, I think that the debate is really interesting. The more interesting and a little biased was the independent media down what we saw from the legacy media. I don't want to belabor it too much because we talked about it a lot last night and also on my show earlier today. I had Keean Bexte join me, but it's just really interesting in Canada that we have bought and paid for media, the legacy media. They are propagandists for the left and for liberals. And then when they hear independent media who are not bought and paid for by anybody, who are independent, who speak our mind, who ask questions that matter to us and to many Canadians that are not represented by the people who sit at the CBC, the reaction is really telling because they don't like it. And their immediate reaction is censorship. Their immediate reaction is that the government needs to stop this. The government needs to control speech even more. This is, we saw so many people, typical suspects on social media, basically saying that this is why we need the CBC and these independent journalists have to go. David, let's talk about the debate tonight. What are you looking for? What do you have any predictions? And what do you think specifically Pierre Poilievre has to accomplish tonight, and what he needs to do to continue to chip away at the support that the Liberal Party has?
Yeah, look, I think the commentators that you get in the mainstream media actually tend to give Pierre a lot of free coaching tips on being likable and other things. And they tend to spare Mark Carney any of those coaching tips about being likable or less brittle because they don't chase him on all these obvious conflicts that have been just, if this guy was a conservative and had parachuted in and had offshore accounts, series of just openly contradictory statements within sometimes days of each other, he'd be held to account. He hasn't been. So I think what I'd say is interesting is I think that anybody that's running in an election, having been involved in a few, has to consider three things. First thing is they've got to appeal to their base. The base has to be fired up about you as the candidate and what you represent and what you speak to. And so for all the free advice that Pierre gets of sounding and acting more like a liberal than a conservative from the mainstream press, I think that he has to be decisive about speaking to issues from the perspective of a conservative. And this lost decade of the past 10 years is opening that opportunity up for him to really address these issues. So is the fact that his opponent, Mark Carney, has borrowed a lot of the key conservative platform issues as a way of running his own campaign. I think the second thing that he's got to do is find a way to reach boomers, which is a natural conservative constituency. And I think there's ways into that, particularly around affordability and around security, personal security, crime, drugs, et cetera, things that people that are 60 and above care about in terms of the life of the cities and the safety they feel when they're in their cities. I think the third thing he's got to do is find a way to really differentiate himself from the fact that Blanchette and Carney and Singh all have the same lines, particularly on energy and energy security issues with respect to the United States. Okay, it looks like Candace is off there for a second, so maybe I'll just talk a little bit more about a couple other things that I think could happen during this debate. There's 5 categories that Steve Paikin, who's the moderator, will be managing for. The first is affordability and cost of living. The second is tariffs and threats to Canada. Obviously, that's going to be the Trump factor, and that's going to be where I believe both Mark Carney and Jagmeet Singh are going to try and place the emphasis. The third is energy and climate, which I think is where Pierre has an opportunity to really differentiate himself from the consensus position. The fourth is how you lead in a crisis, and the fifth is public safety and security. And I think with those 5 areas, there's a couple that are going to provide openings for Pierre, and there's a few that he's going to have to elide past a Carney Singh consensus position from the last 10 years.
Well, that's really interesting and good advice for Pierre Poilievre. You mentioned that Mark Carney often flip-flops and changes his position within a matter of days. Yves-Francois Blanchet pointed this out at the debate, and I want to play this clip because I almost have a feeling that Yves-Francois Blanchet must watch the Candace Malcolm Show and us at Juno News, because he pointed out the exact same contradiction that I focused an entire show on. And then he said, I saw the clip again yesterday, and I had played it on my show yesterday. So I do think that the block may be a fan, a secret fan of us here at Juno News. But anyway, let's play that clip of the block leader last night.
Mid-February, British Columbia. You, like all other Canadian leaders, said something in English that was, if necessary, you would use the executive emergency powers. You said it. I heard it again yesterday. You would force pipelines through Canada and through Quebec. After 2 days after that, with Mr. Roy.
That's not it. That's not it at all.
No. Please be nice. We're almost friends. But then you said to Monsieur Roy, I would never like to force this. So it's not rules that stop this. It's social acceptability that stopped this pipeline because people said no.
Mr. Carney, please reply.
Okay, no. It's the use of emergency powers for the federal government. That's for federal approval. But there also has to be approval, for example, here in Quebec. There has to be approval from the provinces and the support of Indigenous people. This is Canada. That's how Canada works.
So there's so much to unpack from that clip, but it's interesting that, first of all, that Carney did say that, right? We have him on tape. He was in Kelowna, and he was talking about building pipelines and saying that he would use the Emergencies Act if necessary, which to conservative ears, when we hear a Liberal say Emergencies Act, it just brings back like the trucker convoy mayhem and lawlessness that even a court found to be illegal. But when it comes to pipelines, it's like, okay, well, I guess that's good because we want pipelines. And then, of course, he flipped it around. He told the National Post a couple of days ago that he won't prioritize pipelines. And that was why we played the clip again. But Carney's answer there was so unsatisfactory. He said that was just for federal approval, but we obviously need Quebec buy-in and First Nations buy-in. So basically back to where we've been for the last 10 years or so. What do you think about Carney on pipelines?
Look, I think the Liberal Party has a fundamental problem because other nations don't need to invoke Emergencies Act or the suspension of civil rights or the suspension of the normal due process of a federalist legal structure to get something built or to find a pretext for arresting and incarcerating your political opponents and treating them like terrorists while you let actual terror and criminal syndicates get a free pass, right? I find Carney wrote one of the most disgusting op-eds that I've read as a Canadian. It infuriated me. His minion, Chrystia Freeland, of course, followed through on Carney's very specific choice of the word sedition when he referred to truckers. That is the wrong legal term to use for people that were amongst the highest vaccinated cohort in the country that had delivered packages to everybody for 2 years, seamlessly. And then were treated like a criminal element when they finally had it with an unscientific mandate. And it was Mark Carney that wrote sort of the dog whistle marching orders on sedition and on the idea that this was foreign funded and on the idea that terror legislation should be used to chase down foreign interference funding with a bunch of truckers trying to protest laws that were soon dropped. Within weeks afterwards, Canada joined the rest of the civilized world and dropped those dumb laws. So I find his instinct to sort of say we can just use, extremist rules. There are conditions under which you do need to have something like a suspension of normal civil rights and due process. That's not in a normal society how you build a pipeline. You build a pipeline by creating the conditions under which there's an ability to evaluate, build, invest in, and create international market access in one of the world's most wealthy, resource-rich nations, and be able to ship that energy to Europe and Asia, not just to the United States. So I think the whole context of Carney's comments bear a lot of investigation. I think it's the reason why the Liberal Party has, presided over a failed decade. And I think that the fact that he has to flip-flop is because the actual Liberal Party ideology is deeply unpopular with Canadians when they understand it. And as a result of that, the poll numbers tell him that, and that's why the key planks of his platform so far that have been popular have been the liberal adoption of conservative ideas. So he will keep flip-flopping because what he thinks and his ideology is deeply distasteful to Canadians when it's understood, and it's been a terrible disaster everywhere it's been tried, in the UK and Canada and elsewhere. It's led to poverty, and it's led to a unilateral disarmament of energy security in the democratic West by shareholder-led companies, while despotic states are able to arm up and actually print hundreds of billions of dollars off the energy that nations like Canada won't ship to places like Germany and Western Europe that really desperately need it. And Mark Carney has presided over this unilateral disarmament in the name of net zero, which is this green alarmist philosophy that he has embodied more than just about any other public figure. His track record of failure on net zero was punctuated this last 2 years by every major bank in the world running away from his punitive GFANZ ideology that he created out of the Glasgow Accord. And that failure is sort of what's preceded him parachuting in as the interim prime minister and now trying to run the stuff. So I think he's got three problems. One, this use of sort of extrajudicial processes to try and get something as simple as pipelines built in what should be an open free market society. Two, he's trying to hang on to failed policies like C-69 without letting go of the fact that those have been part of the decade-long problem that he advised and advised very publicly for 5 years. And three, because of that, he's going to keep flip-flopping in English and in French, in one community where he wants to win votes and another community where he wants to maintain his base. And I think he's the one that's under a lot of pressure right now. I think energy and climate is going to be a category for Pierre to exploit because it's a category where the Conservatives can provide a much better path to actual global emissions by the shipping of natural gas to displace coal in the rest of the world. That is a big story that needs to be told by the Conservatives with a lot more confidence. Because it does more for the planet than anything the Liberals have ever tried to do. Their performance outcomes for the last decade have been terrible on global emissions and on anything related to the natural trade-offs between energy, the economy, and the environment. And so I think that's an area that Pierre can exploit. I think that's an area that will fire up the base, and I think that's an area where he can actually win over people that understand that we should never been put in a position where a vassal economic state to the United States. I expect that if he can connect that energy and climate piece to the tariffs and threats to Canada and to affordability and cost of living, there's a thread through this that kind of has lead in a crisis, energy and climate, economic resilience, the ability to bring down the cost of living and household affordability and inflation, and all of that to position Canada to deal with the tariffs in a more productive way. Pierre's got a great story to tell on that, and I hope that he's able to put that together in a way that continues to wrong-foot Mark Carney in his desperate attempts early on to latch on through a prorogued parliament to conservative ideas.
It's so interesting that, I mean, if you look at the polls and you trust the polls, we're seeing that the race is really tightening. And I think that specifically the issue set has changed. For those who are still thinking about Donald Trump and the trade war, their preferred candidate seems to be Mark Carney. But for those who are like living in the world and looking around us and looking at Canada and the cost of living issues, the crime issues, the just like all the things that feel broken in Canada, you lead towards Pierre Poilievre. There's an interesting story posted by Juno News yesterday, and it was based off of a Leger poll. And the headline says, hope drives Poilievre supporters and fear motivates Carney voters, according to the poll. I just want to read from this because I just found this super interesting. So it says, a new Leger poll conducted between April 11th and 14th with a sample size of 1,000 showed that 6 in 10 Liberal voters supported the party because they're motivated primarily by fear of Trump and believe Mark Carney is the leader best suited to protect Canada. And then it says, conversely, 76% of Conservative voters would allocate the vote towards a party because they have hope for a better future. And that's just such an interesting juxtaposition, because I almost think that the narrative that the media likes to paint is that the Conservatives use hate and fear to divide people, and that's like sort of the motivating thing for the party, and that Liberals are the party of like optimism and hope and change. And in this election, it's literally the opposite, that if you're motivated by fear, you're voting Liberal. And if you're motivated by hope, you're voting Conservative. What do you think of that?
Look, yeah, I think, you know, I think it's two sides of the same coin, actually, in the sense that if you ask, in Canada, you've referred to your kids, and I think, you know, when I think about Canada, I think about my son, Aiden. I think you hope the best for your kids, and you hope the best for your country, and you hope the best for your community. And when you see it degraded by drugs or violence or reckless approaches to law enforcement, or the lack of ability to shut down, these terror-supporting Hamas parades, or you see the suspension of civil rights in a soft fascism endorsed by a Mark Carney and then executed by a Chrystia Freeland stuff, you start to feel like, I wouldn't describe as a conservative what I feel is fear. I think it's deep concern that we're losing control of what is one of the greatest societies ever created in human history, and one of the luckiest societies, in that we have the most resource-rich, vast country right next to the world's most vibrant and active and consumptive economy. It's like the perfect world, right? Canada literally lives in the most perfect set of conditions imaginable for any modern democracy. It's extraordinary. And to see all of those advantages fumbled away by recklessness, partisanship, small-minded ideologies, fraudulent, fake, sad, narrow-minded approaches to green alarmism because it feels good and it sounds kind of loosely Western European, and it was sort of fashionable at Davos 3 years ago. That kind of stuff feels sad. It feels like we're missing something. And so I think that hope-fear divide is probably one where, and again, I sort of connecting some dots here, having read, when you read some of the media accounts, a lot of the elderly actually live in fear. And one of the reasons they live in fear is because they're often shut in, or they often encounter the world through their television set. And if you watch television all day long, and there's a lot of data around this, then you naturally have a predisposition to think the world is a terrible place. Things are always going wrong. There's crime everywhere. There's a problem around, right? And anybody that's saturated with social media develops mental problems. Anybody that's saturated with TV develops a sense of fear. And I think if you were to take the hope-fear matrix and you overlaid it on the population demographic, I think what you find is that Carney's doing very well with the elderly that get most of their news through mainstream state-funded media like CTV, CBC, Global, et cetera, and are told that Donald Trump is threatening the existence of Canada in some fundamental way. They're told that there's all these problems, and the Liberals present themselves as a solution to a crisis. And they did this during COVID. They emphasized fear and emphasized the state as the only solution that could solve for that fear. And for ideologues on the left, because the state always is the solution, crises that come along provide them with a great pretext for invoking the state as the solution, invoking their ideological presumptions as the solution. So I think fear is partly manufactured in this case, and I think it's hitting those over the age of 60 particularly hard, and that's the cohort that's backing Mark Carney. And so I think it's natural that younger people live for hope, and I think it's natural that parents look at their kids and hope the best for them. And I think it's natural that the elderly worry about their own security, rightfully, and they see what's gone wrong, and they want to be told that there's a way forward and there's security. And a lot of them depend on the government already for some of that security through pensions and other things, and they they would look to somebody that they perceive to be, well regarded with a strong resume, like a Mark Carney, who looks like a safe pair of hands. And so I think Pierre's got to do some work to unlock a narrative of hope for those who are older and more worried about what the Donald Trump threat represents, and how that cohort has resulted in a shift from what was a landslide in the making for the Conservatives only a few months ago to what's now a knife fight separated by a couple of points.
Absolutely. Such a good point. So just for the audience here, so we have the debate in the bottom corner. This happened last night as well during the French debate, where the leaders came out, they took some photographs, they all went to their lecterns, and so it looked like it was starting, but we still have another 8 minutes left. So I presume it's going to be the same thing. They're just posing for some photographs, and then they're each going to go to their own stations. And last night they were just sort of taking notes and they were just showing it, and then it was overlaid with CBC commentary. So we won't throw to it just yet, but we are keeping an eye on it. And it's really interesting. I think that the format for tonight will be better than past debates. It's moderated by Steve Paikin of TVO, who is one of the best journalists in the country. And I don't like the legacy media, and there's very few of them that I would compliment, but I think that Steve Paikin is very fair. He's tough and he's no nonsense, and he doesn't have a bias. He truly doesn't. I mean, everyone has a little bit of a bias, I suppose, but he does a very good job of being fair. And so I'm looking forward to that. I also think it's a good thing that the Green Party is not in the debate. I think it is an absurdity. The way the rules were written, it was very specifically written so that the Green Party would be allowed in, but the PPC party and Maxime Bernier would not be allowed in. And this was during the last election cycle. So the requirements that they had were that you had to have candidates in 90% of the ridings, that you had to have at least one MP, and that you had to be polling at least 4%. And so last time they did it that way just to exclude Maxime Bernier, which was not good. But this time, I'm happy that neither of them are there. I don't think that the French candidates should be there. I wish that they would exclude Jagmeet Singh, because I just don't think that he's ultra relevant at this point. Obviously, it depends on what happens. But if you're looking at some of these polls, the NDP could get entirely wiped out. And even I would even argue with Blanchette that he's only running candidates in Quebec. So why is he in the English debate? I don't understand that. I would prefer a one-on-one debate between Carney and Poilievre. I think we all have criticisms of the debate commission. And I want to play this clip because it's just so amusing. But the CBC was very up in arms over last night, the fact that Juno News and True North and Rebel were able to ask questions. So CBC's David Cochrane had the Leaders Debate Commissioner on his program today to grill him, to basically just say, how dare you allow those other people to ask questions? And it's just sort of an interesting back and forth. So let's play that clip, please.
Will they be able to do what they did? Rebel News got as many questions as I think CBC, Radio Canada, Press Canadian, and CTV or Global combined last night. There were almost 50% of the questions, and some of them ventured into territory that really are not issues in this election campaign, were not issues in that debate. And I'm not saying reporters should be restricted in terms of what they ask, but if the debate commission is going to organize these things, it didn't seem to have control on it last night, sir.
Well, we were learning from what happened last night, and you'll see, hopefully, a fair representation tonight.
But didn't the same thing happen in 2021? I remember vividly at the museum in Gatineau that the same sort of thing happened with people stacking the microphones and the questions is going in a totally different direction.
Well, there's only so much we can do to control free speech,
I understand that.
You got to understand that.
But, lifeguards got to look after the pool, right? And the debate commission was set up for this. And people are now calling for it to be completely scrapped because of what we saw last night. I just wonder if you think there's a loss of public trust in the function of this organization.
I think the public will judge us on the debates themselves.
So, I mean, this is just sort of hilarious. David Cochrane came across very petty and small in that clip. The fact that he said that the Rebel got more than the other people combined, how is that even true? The debate itself was hosted by Radio Canada, right? So they got the entire debate. And this, he really is prodding, saying you got to censor the speech, that somehow you're not allowed to ask questions about topics that weren't included in the debate. I would imagine the scrum is entirely for topics not included in the debate, right? When the CBC journalist got up there and was just asking the same question of Jagmeet Singh that had literally already been talked about in the debate about the costing of their platform, it's why are you wasting our time? At least Juno News and True North and the Rebel were asking interesting questions that Canadians do want to know, whether or not the CBC likes it or not.
It's a loss of ideological control by the state-run broadcaster. You know, they're living in a. It's funny watching a guy who lives in a business model from the 1970s, sort of dialing into a modern age, right? They're frustrated. If they don't have control over the narrative, they don't have control over the questions, they can feel it slipping away. His frustration is probably more political and partisan than it is, you know, principled, in the sense that why would he be bothered that independent media had a chance to ask interesting questions? I believe what he's truly bothered about is the fact those questions touched on sacred issues that have a politically correct motif and framing in the public broadcasting world. And these people are fearless. There were fearless questions asked about the topics that everybody in Canada actually talks about around the kitchen table. And only in the media world, where there's sort of this explicit framing that's not permitting people to perceive that it's okay to say, let's ask some harder questions about this residential school hoax issue that we ran into. Or let's ask some harder questions about what's actually happening with the transgenderism issue and what that means for girls in sports and girls in safe places. Let's ask some questions. I can tell you right now, after we talked about the debate and I had dinner with some people at a dinner party. And, you know, not everybody has the same politics. And people were all about those questions that were asked by the independent media, all about it. That's what people wanted to talk about. People did not want to talk anymore about Donald Trump or whether he was a good guy, bad guy in between, right? Not interested. People really wanted to talk about girls and boys in sports and what the limits were on a guy deciding he's a girl and that he's therefore allowed to play with the advantages of, you know, all the biological advantages. That was the conversation almost immediately after I got there and said, oh, I was following the debate and having a conversation with Candace Malcolm on Juno. You know, people really care about those issues. They were glad that question was asked. And these are not people that are uniform politically. These are people that have, you know, the guy there has 2 daughters and 1 son. And, you know, they're all athletes. And this is a burning question for a lot of people who have daughters in sports because it feels deeply unfair to them and they have to deal with it. And that question got asked. Now, Jagmeet Singh didn't like that question. Jagmeet Singh is done politically, by the way. I posted a note on this. I think the way he responded to independent media was terrible, and it was beneath his office and beneath the status what he should be doing as a politician. But CBC is scared to death of what happens next if Pierre Poilievre wins, because the game is up. The 1970s business model of depending on taxpayers to have to pay to be told what the Pravda-style politically correct viewpoints that are permissible from the state are anymore. That's over. And I thought that actually the debate commissioner did a good job of responding to that by emphasizing free speech.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of ironically, but okay, folks, we had the 2-minute warning. Now we've got the 1-minute warning. So we're watching the screen. We have to look out for Pierre Poilievre. I do believe he's going to come much harder and much stronger against Carney than he did last night. Watch for the 3 leaders to sort of team up on Carney. Watch for questions about conflicts of interest. Interestingly, when they were talking about housing last night, Carney mentioned a company that Brookfield owns a 51% share in. So I think that the conflict of interest question will come up. I think that Mark Carney's residency will come up. I think that there's a lot at play here. And okay, we're going to switch to the intro and we'll be back after the debate, folks. Enjoy.
They will debate the major challenges facing our country, from tariffs to the cost of living, public safety, energy, and leading in a crisis. Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Paikin, your moderator for tonight's debate. Each leader has agreed to the following: no notes, answer the questions, stay on theme, stay on time. How much each leader speaks will be counted on these clocks, visible to the leaders and to you at home. This is the 2025 Federal Leaders Debate. Well, welcome, leaders. Good to be with you here tonight in Montreal for what I'm sure will be a memorable evening. Our first theme is tariffs and threats to Canada, and we will begin with a round of questions. You will each have a minute to answer, and then we'll go to open debate, and the first question goes to Mr. Carney. Okay, what is the starting point for negotiations, Mr. Carney, with the United States if, as you have stated, our relationship with the U.S. is over as we know it?
Well, first, Steve, may I thank you and also thank fellow leaders for their service to Canada, people at home for taking the time to watch. I just want to underscore the premise to your question, because I think the relationship that we've had with the United States, relationship over the course of almost the last 4 decades, which has been one of steady and increasing integration, has fundamentally changed because the president is looking to fundamentally restructure the trading system. So the starting point has to be one of strength. It has to show that we have control of our own economic destiny, has to have a clear plan here at home to build this economy, to diversify our trading partners with like-minded countries, and also has to have a position of strength in terms of our reaction to the U.S. unjustified tariffs. And that's why we have put in place counter tariffs that have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here at home.
Mr. Poilievre, would you do anything differently?
Well, first of all, thank you, Steve, and thank you to our fellow contestants here today. It's an honor to be here. What would I do different? Well, I'll start by what I would do the same. I think we do need to counter the American tariffs with our own to deter this economic aggression. We must make clear that we will always be sovereign and independent. What would I be doing differently? Well, we need to be in a position of strength. The Liberal government has weakened our economy with anti-energy laws, red tape, and high taxes that have driven $500 billion out of our country into the United States and made us incapable of shipping our resources overseas. That weakness threatens our ability to stand up for ourselves. So what would I do? I would cut taxes, red tape, and approve our resource projects so that we can get our goods to market and bring home the jobs so we stand up to President Trump from a position of strength.
Mr. Singh, you get the next question. Can we trust the United States to work with us on matters such as Arctic sovereignty and defense policy?
I think we've seen, first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in, and thanks for the question, Steve. We've seen what, for a lot of people, feels like a betrayal when we look at the United States. I grew up in a border town. I grew up in Windsor, and we saw how connected we were as a city and as a community. People lived on one side of the border, worked on the other. People traveled back and forth all the time. We're in the automotive capital of Canada, and we knew how important it was to be able to build cars in Canada, but we saw that those cars went back and forth across the border. Seeing what Donald Trump did to attack Canada in this unprovoked way without any justification really felt like a betrayal. And so Canadians now are right to say, well, we don't really trust Donald Trump at this point, and we can't really have a lot of faith in him. So when it comes to our Arctic sovereignty and our security, we need to make decisions that are in our best interest and no longer be so dependent and so reliant on the U.S. And that's what I would advocate for, making sure we are resilient, independent, and less dependent on the United States.
Monsieur Blanchet, for you, what supports would you want to see for industries affected by tariffs, many, of course, of which are in Quebec?
Many of them. First, be all welcome in Quebec and Montreal. You have me because I try not to speak English in Montreal. However, I think we should never underestimate the threat that Mr. Trump poses on Quebec economy and Canada economy and Mexico economy. But we must acknowledge the fact that the economy of Quebec is built differently. The challenges are not the same. The necessity for Quebec to have at least partly its own voice in the negotiation is important. The difference between Quebec and Canada is very important in terms of economy, but also in terms of identity and language and values and who we are and the way we want to handle immigration. So we have the right to be different. And if this difference is being respected by whoever becomes Prime Minister of Canada, we will be reliable partners in order to achieve the best possible negotiation and protect ourselves and our economies as partners.
Merci, Monsieur Blanchet. Okay, we now move into open debate, and I'll start it off, Mr. Carney, with you, and then we go from there. Do you still support dollar-for-dollar tariffs, even if they ultimately threaten Canadian jobs and businesses?
No, and in fact, we've already moved off from dollar. We'll do. The United States economy is more than 10 times the size of the Canadian economy. And the principle in terms of our counter tariffs is to have maximum impact in the United States, as I said a moment ago, minimum impact here. So we have to think about the impact on Canadian businesses. I'll give you one example, if I may. In the auto sector, the way we've designed those auto tariffs is that Canadian automakers, if they maintain production here, if they maintain their investments here, when I say Canadian automakers, I mean automakers that have jobs and plants and production in Canada, then they can have lower tariffs on what they ship to the United States. We create a huge incentive for them in order to do that. We also have carved out the Canadian auto parts sector. Last point, I know you're pressed for time, the Canadian auto parts sector, so that it can remain competitive with the United States. We're focused on maximizing Canadian jobs, maximizing the harm in the U.S., so that we get them where we need them.
Mr. Poilievre, you want in, then Mr. Singh.
Well, Mr. Carney, you claim that you want our country to respond with strength, but after the last decade, half of which time you've been Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, our economy is weaker than ever before. It's been the worst growth in the G7. We've lost $500 billion of investment south of the border. You supported blocking pipelines in Canada that gave Donald Trump and the U.S. a near monopoly over our energy. And now you want to keep in place Bill C-69, the liberal no new development law that blocks us from shipping our resources overseas. How could you possibly think it's a good idea to give the Americans a continued monopoly on our energy projects when you have seen how much these liberal policies have weakened our country over the last decade?
Let Mr. Carney respond, and then Mr. Singh.
Sure.
If I may, yes. So let's go to my record. My record is a month long as Prime Minister. And this goes to the heart of coming to the Americans with strength, but doing the right thing for Canada. Within the first week as Prime Minister, I sat down with all the premiers of the provinces and territories, as well as the leaders of the Indigenous peoples. Got an agreement with all the provinces and territories, doesn't happen very often, got an agreement for them to have one Canadian economy instead of 13, first point. Secondly, to commit the federal government to do its part by Canada Day, so free trade in Canada by Canada Day. Thirdly, the federal government to commit with respect to project reviews.
The question was about pipelines.
I'm getting to it. Thirdly, one project, one review, and relying
That's
on provincial. Yes, it is possible under our system. It is the impact assessment. It is agreed on under the impact assessment framework, and we have a cooperation agreement with British Columbia already. We're looking forward to them with the other provinces. We will move forward.
Mr. Singh's turn, please.
Of course, we agree around having a strategic response to the United States. But what I'm concerned about is what we're doing here in Canada. We are already seeing threats to our country in that just the threats alone of the tariffs have meant Canadians have lost their jobs. The threats of the tariffs that are in place right now, the impact of those tariffs is that we've lost jobs in steel, aluminum, and the auto sector. People are already losing their jobs. And while, Mr. Carney, you had time, as you mentioned, not very long time, but as Prime Minister, you showed us your priorities. The first thing you did is you had traveled, you made a tax cut for millionaires, which was reversing on the capital gains. So you gave a tax cut to millionaires, but you didn't have time to increase the amount that workers get on EI. Right now, workers who are struggling and wondering, what am I going to do if I lose my job? Workers who've lost their job are saying, how do I pay my bills when EI only covers half of a worker's salary? Maybe 40 years ago that would have worked, but right now most workers are spending their entire salary just to pay the bills, to pay their mortgage and their rent, and to put food on the table. So EI is not good enough, and it shows Canadians that you didn't make it a priority to protect those that are impacted by these tariffs, that are threatened because their jobs are lost.
We have not heard from Monsieur Blanchet yet in this segment, so please.
Yeah, Mr. Carney, you are becoming a real Canadian leader, saying one thing in French and another one in English. You said in British Columbia in February that you would force oil and gas through pipelines through Quebec, either we wanted it or not. You would use emergency powers in order to do so. And 2 days later in Montreal, you said that you would never do that without the approval of Quebec. What's the point of using emergency powers if you do have the agreement of Quebec? However, I do agree with you. It's important to be very strong in front of Mr. Trump. However, I would keep the dollar for dollar policy. Don't be weak in front of Mr. Trump. And those counter tariffs have to be targeted. You have put out already $2 billion for Ontario auto industry, car industry, and the lumberwood industry in Quebec has already paid to United States $2 billion, and you have not raised one finger in order to help us.
Let's get from Mr. Poilievre and then a response from Mr. Carney.
Well, Mr. Carney refused to answer the question about pipelines. Just the other day, he said that he doesn't necessarily think we need to build pipelines. Let me tell you what that means. Right now, the Americans get 97% of our oil, 100% of our natural gas exports at big discounts. We have to send Canadian oil from Western Canada through the States just to get it back to Quebec because we don't have a pipeline. And now there's this law, Liberal Law C-69, which effectively bans pipelines. The 14 biggest energy and resource companies say it has to go if we're ever going to build another project. And I asked Mr. Carney why he would keep in place this anti-pipeline law that effectively empowers Donald Trump to have a total monopoly on our single biggest export. Why would you not repeal this Liberal law? Isn't it because you are exactly the same in the same line as Justin Trudeau and the rest of the Liberal team that is now making up your cabinet?
Let's get a response.
Well, let me pick up a couple of points that have been made. The first thing I did as Prime Minister was to cut the carbon tax. That's the first thing. Second thing is made a commitment that all proceeds from our tariffs will go to workers and those companies most affected. There were several points
Means
raised.
nothing so far.
If I may, Mr. Steve, if I may address, I'm trying to do it quickly because several points raised. All proceeds go to workers and the firms most effective, and those proceeds are considerable. Third thing, I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in getting energy infrastructure built. That means pipelines, that means carbon capture storage, that means electricity grids. And here's how you do it. And we've already moved in the first month. Cooperation agreements with the provinces. Guess what? We are a federation. You need to cooperate with Quebec. You need to cooperate with the provinces. You need to get First Nations and Indigenous people buy-in. You can do that through the one project, one review window that we put in place at that first ministers' meeting, as well as, if necessary, using emergency powers to fulfill the federal responsibility, but not the unique.
Mr. Poilievre, you want to come back on that?
What you're saying, Mr. Carney, with respect, is a total contradiction. The No New Development Law, C-69, guarantees there will not be one-stop shop because it requires the Government of Canada to actually duplicate
So what Mr. Poilievre is saying is that have no rules,
project.
have no regulation,
have one
have no
stop
controls
over
any energy
Mr. Singh, we just got to let him finish his sentence. Let's just let him finish his sentence.
That is not true. In fact, Mr. Singh, the reality is we should have strong rules enforced once. We shouldn't have multiple levels of referral that takes now 17 years to get a major project approved in this country. That is why in the last 10 years we've had the worst economic growth in the entire G7. We cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change, and the Conservative plan for a change will include repealing the anti-pipeline law so we can get our energy to markets other than the United States.
Mr. Singh, then Mr. Carney.
While these two compete about who's more pro-pipeline, I think what we need to do is, it's clear. The Liberals bought a pipeline. They built a pipeline. I don't know what Pierre is complaining about. That's what they did. I think what we need to do, if we're talking about energy in our country, we need to build an east-west grid. Let's use our power as a nation to build a national project that creates good jobs, that strengthens us for the future, where we connect the low-cost energy from jurisdictions and provinces across this beautiful land and have low-cost energy for businesses, for people, so we can build a stronger economy. That's the energy of the future that we need.
Mr. Carney.
3 quick points. First, the pipeline built, yes, TMX built. That's why oil exports up 50% over the course of the last few years. Secondly,
I don't think
Mr. Singh is absolutely right about the east-west grid interconnections, which is part of the energy corridor. Huge opportunities for this country. We have to be able to do more than one thing. Third point, fundamental point. We can give ourselves far more than Donald Trump can ever take away. If we have one Canadian economy, not 13, and if we just look at that agreement we got with the provinces, look at what Ontario and Nova Scotia have just announced in terms of their steps towards this. This is within our grasp.
Monsieur Blanchet, what should we be prepared to concede in our negotiations with the United States?
I want to be back to something that Mr. Carney said. You can't do something and the opposite, and you can't fill people's mind with nonsense. Quebec has review institution, and you cannot, through a federal decision, even through a Quebec government decision, go over the BAP, as we call it. If the BAP says no,
Just say.
it's no.
I know.
Good.
I know.
Let's
but this
keep
is
that in mind.
This is the point. This is, if I may, this is the point. The federal government can do the following, which is to take the decision to abide by the decision of the Quebec BAP. That is within the federal government's power. That is known as cooperative federalism. That's what we need to do.
And do you understand one other point fast?
This is what we need. This is what we need to do in a crisis.
We have Moïse and then Mr. Poilievre.
Yeah. The building of those pipelines will take at least 10 to 14 years. Mr. Trump will be 90 years old, not president no more. And somebody of course, less terrible will be there before you can even dream of having oil through this pipeline of yours.
We're less than a minute to go. Mr. Poilievre, I promised you next.
Listen, after the last 10 years of Liberals blocking pipelines and killing jobs,
Sounds wild when you
we
say that.
actually need to get things
100%
done.
sense.
We need a change, and our conservative plan for change will repeal the No New Pipelines law. It will create a true one-stop shop, set up shovel-ready zones with pre-permitting so that we can approve LNG liquefaction export plants, mines, pipelines, nuclear plants, and also hydroelectric dams so that we can generate the power we need to be strong, self-reliant, and stand on our own 2 feet for a change.
Last quick word to Mr. Carney.
Okay, quick word. Bringing it back to what we were talking about, which is tariffs, the threats to Canada, how to negotiate. We need these options. We need these options to build domestically, to build one Canadian economy. We need to act. We need to diversify our trade partners.
And that
will
is
give
our
us
time in
strength
this
to
segment.
the US.
That is our time. Okay, you know my job tonight. I got to be the heavy guy here every now and then, making sure everybody comes to time. And I'm keeping an eye as well on making sure that everybody gets rough justice over here. That concludes our first section and our first debate. Up next, affordability and the cost of living.
Our goal is to double the pace of housing construction.
It will lower your bills, build homes you can actually afford.
Il faudra parler des entreprises du Québec, des travailleurs du Québec, des aînés du Québec.
A big, powerful bring it home tax cut on work, investment, energy, and home building.
Okay, leaders, same idea, one-on-one questions followed by open debate format. And Mr. Poilievre, you get the first question this time. Many provinces, including some provinces with conservative governments, have ambitious housing targets, none of which have been met. Why do you think your housing plan will be any different?
Let me start by talking to the young people of the nation and those who are aspiring to home ownership. You know, it was only 10 years ago you could buy an average house for $450,000. But in the last lost Liberal decade, housing costs have doubled, rising faster than in any country in the G7. And so now our youth cannot afford a home, and our seniors are worried about being evicted. We can't afford a fourth Liberal term of rising housing costs. We need a change. And our conservative plan for change will, 1, axe the federal sales tax on new homes. 2, incentivize municipalities to cut their construction taxes to bring houses down in cost by $100,000. 3, sell off federal land for homes. And 4, train up 350,000 young trades workers who can help build those homes. Because you deserve a home, and we're going to make it happen for a change.
Also on the issue of affordability, Mr. Singh, you get the next question. How do you bring down grocery prices in the midst of a trade war?
I appreciate the question. This is a big concern. When I talk to Canadians, they tell me they're really feeling squeezed from the cost of living. That's one of the top things that people tell me about. People are saying, I can't afford to buy groceries. Every time I go to the grocery store, it's just ongoing worry and this feeling of anxiety that can I actually afford the things that my family needs? On top of that, people are worried about the cost of homes. I think those are the two biggest things I hear. So we can do things about this. Other countries have taken concrete steps. We can put in a price cap on food essentials. France has done it. Greece has done it to great success. It's brought down the cost of food significantly in both those jurisdictions. We can also ban corporate landlords from buying up the affordable homes to keep homes that are affordable. We can make things better for Canadians, but it requires having the courage to take on the powerful corporations that are ripping you off, that are price gouging you. And we know that price gouging is one of the major reasons why food prices are going up. You're never going to hear Pierre Poilievre or Mr. Carney talk about the fact that these are the corporations.
Thank you,
ripping
Mr.
off,
Singh.
I
That's
will.
time. Mr. Blanchet, I want to ask you about old age security, which will soon cost this country $100 billion annually. We understand you would like to expand it. How would you pay for that?
We would want it to be just for everybody because the Liberals have created a discrimination against elders which are 65 to 75 years old, having 10% less income from federal government than those who are over 75. But the best way to do it is to have everybody pay its fair share in terms of tax, which means that one should not be entitled to hide money in fiscal paradise in order not to pay him or his clients or friends, not to pay billions of dollars in taxes that could be used to help the situation of elders. Those are things which are supposed to be applied to everybody. There are a lot of questions to be answered about that. Other ways to do it is to reduce the pressure on housing price to make sure that the whole budget of elders and families and workers can afford houses which have increased dramatically in price.
Merci, Monsieur Blanchet. That's time for this one. Mr. Carney, I want to ask you about housing, which over the past decade has gone from a problem to a crisis while the Liberals were in power. Is your policy on getting homes built any different from your predecessors, and how?
This is one of the reasons why I entered this contest, because of the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, and the Trump crisis to help fix it. And I would say, look, the housing approach is fundamentally different because we need a fundamentally different approach. We need to build housing at a rate that we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. We do need a fundamentally different approach. And with the fundamentally different approach, we can build an entirely new industry. So the question is how? Now, Mr. Poilievre and I agree on some things. Okay? I agree as well on reducing the tax on first-time home purchases as a way to buy. But I am focused on increasing the supply of homes and doing that in a way that uses Canadian technology and modular prefabricated housing, that uses Canadian lumber, including in reinforced timber, and uses Canadian workers. And in all respects, we're scaling up to double the rate of home building.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. That's time. We now move to open forum here. And Mr. Singh, you get the first comment. Many of you have pledged to cut the GST on many aspects of buying a home. And Mr. Singh, I want to ask you, would you cut the GST on anything else in order to make life more affordable?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm the only one on this stage that fought to give people a GST holiday. Interestingly, while the GST holiday helps working class folks, middle class folks by taking off the GST off essentials, the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre voted against that. They opposed the idea of giving people, actual folks that need help, a tax break and would rather give millionaires a tax break, which shows you whose side he's on, which is not surprising. But what is surprising is that Mr. Carney also said that giving people a break on their GST is a bad idea. Mr. Carney, why do you think giving a tax break to capital gains folks that earn more than $1 million is a good idea, but helping a family afford their groceries, helping people afford their bills for their internet, their cell phone, their home heating, giving them relief to take the GST off those is a bad idea, but giving a tax break to people who really only earn over more than $1.4 million, that's somehow a good idea.
Okay, you went after
that's your numbers.
You went after Mr. Poilievre first, so I'm going to give him the first shot to respond.
Well, Mr. Carney, the reality is that housing costs doubled under the Liberal government, while Justin Trudeau made exactly the same promises that you are now repeating today. He promised that he would double home building. In fact, home building went down. He promised that he'd reduce the cost. In fact, it went up. And here we are. Mark Carney is asking for a fourth Liberal term, repeating the exact same Liberal promises that priced you out of a house. Just a few weeks ago, before the election, the Liberals voted against taking the GST off new homes, and they have continued to build up bureaucracies that block construction. We need a change so that you can afford a home, and our change will be, again, to axe the sales tax on new homes, incentivize municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, and cut development costs, train up 350,000 young people who can be in the trades to build those homes and sell off the land that is going to be needed in order to build homes. That is a real plan for you to own a home and afford your life for a change.
Mr. Carney, they're coming at you from both sides. What do you say?
Okay. I know it may be difficult, Mr. Poilievre. You spent years running against Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax, and they're both gone. Okay, they're both gone. And
You're
we're
doing
in
a pretty good
new
impersonation of them with the same policies tonight.
Very different. Look, I'm a very different person from Justin Trudeau. Focus is on results.
Were you his economic
and so how
advisor?
to drive results in the housing market? You've got to change the model of building. You've got to increase the financing for housing developers, $25 billion on the table for those housing developers, $10 billion for deeply affordable homes, cutting development charges in half, lowering the cost of the building of those homes by 20%, and lowering the emissions and the run costs of those homes by another 20%. This is how you drive affordability. This is how you bring young people back into the housing market.
Exactly what Trudeau
and then Mr.
promised.
Singh.
You claim to be very different from Mr. Trudeau. Now, the point is to show that you are any better than Mr. Trudeau. You claim to have a lot of experience in many things, and you know things. Last time we had somebody saying that they knew things, it was the senators, and they killed the law that protected supply management because they knew better than us and were elected by nobody, exactly like you are today. You say that you are a great crisis manager. Which one? I heard of nothing. As far as I know, Brexit happened, even if you were against it. You say you are a great negotiator. What have you negotiated but fiscal paradises in Bermudas or Cayman Islands? You have to prove something, and you have to reveal what you own in those companies if you want people to believe you.
Mr. Singh, you wanted to.
Yes, returning to the topic of housing. Now, it's very important. Obviously, we need to build homes that people can afford. Mr. Poilievre had the opportunity to show us what he could do. He was the Minister of Housing under Stephen Harper. And during that time, guess how many homes he built? He built 6 homes during that entire time. This is not something you can trust to build homes. He built 6 homes.
200,000.
And this has been confirmed again and again. He built 6 homes. That's it. Now, the problem, though, with Mr. Carney as well, he's laid out a plan. The problem is that when he was the chair of Brookfield Investments, this is a company that made a strategic decision to buy up affordable homes in cities like Toronto where people were paying a decent rent. And they purposely bought those homes, kicked out the tenants, and jacked up the rents. That is not someone you can trust, sadly, to deal with the housing crisis when Mr. Carney, you profited off of it.
We're going to get responses here. Mr. Poilievre first, Mr. Carney second.
First of all, Mr. Singh,
hold this up to remind you.
The Toronto Star, the Toronto Star debunked your falsehoods.
No, it was 6 homes, and
I appreciate neither Liberals or NDP are very good with math, but in that year, the year I was the minister, if I could,
which is great.
The year I was,
Singh, let's let him answer.
In the year I was
high enough, though.
The year I was minister, we had 200,000 homes built, and guess what the average price of a home was at the time? $450,000.
And guess what happened at the end of the Conservative reign?
One bedrooms rented out for $900. And that since that time, housing costs have actually doubled under the Liberals.
They doubled
and
now we
have Mr. Carney making tens of billions of dollars of spending promises that will ultimately continue to build bureaucracy. We don't need more bureaucracy in Ottawa. We tried that for 10 Liberal years, Mr. Carney. What we need is to build homes in communities. And that means axing taxes on home building and getting the government out of the way so that builders can actually build.
I think,
Mr. Carney, you are on housing. We need a change, and you, sir, are not a change.
Mark Carney.
I'm going to pick up on, I thought that answer was quite revealing. The first thing is that it's an attitude towards housing that absolutely ignores affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, issues with vulnerable people, ignores the rental market, ignores all other aspects of it. So the 6 are the relevant. Mr. Singh is absolutely right. The 6 are the relevant.
200,000.
The 200,000 are a different part of the housing market. There are many Canadians. There are many Canadians at different income levels. The second thing it reveals is a misunderstanding, I'll be polite, of how the government's balance sheet can catalyze enormous private investment. And that is what we need to do to solve the housing crisis. It happens to be what we need to do as a whole to address the economic crisis that's been forced on us by President Trump.
Mr. Blanchet?
Yeah. You have spoken much more than I have, so I won't ask a question. I will make a statement instead. I'm not saying that you cannot do what you pretend that you are able to do. We just have no proof so far. I'm saying quite clearly that you cannot be entitled to do it alone. You cannot be entitled to hold all the power in your two hands. You cannot go out there and fix things for Canada and Quebec without being seriously checked by serious people. You cannot go out there and speak for Quebec without Quebec having its own strong voice to protect itself and to promote its different economy. So if you want to collaborate, let's say right now that whatever happens, even if minority government happens, you will be a partner with the different Quebec economy and identity, which you have been not interested in for the economic part and not respectful for the identity part.
Let me get Mr. Singh in at this point. Can you tell us what's the first thing you would do to make life more affordable for Canadians?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do, and I've laid out some of those things. I think fundamentally, I'm the only person on stage that not only fought for real relief for people in terms of affordability, I'm the only one that fought for pharmacare that actually makes life more affordable by giving people medication coverage, dental care that gives people more affordability by letting them access their services if you're a senior and a kid. I fought for childcare to make sure people could afford childcare. All measures that Mr. Poilievre voted against, all measures that Mr. Blanchet voted against. So if you want someone that's going to fight for you in Ottawa to actually make life more affordable, you can't entrust all the power to Mr. Carney. He doesn't have a track record of making life more affordable for people, but we do. So vote for a New Democrat, and we'll continue this work to make life more affordable for you, while the Conservatives and the Bloc have voted against those measures to make life affordable, because that's not who they care about. New Democrats are in it for you.
Pierre Poilievre.
The number one expense for families today is taxes, more than they spend on food, clothing, and shelter combined. This after 10 years of Liberal tax increases. We can't afford a fourth term of high Liberal taxes. And that's why Conservatives have a plan for change. And that plan includes
voted against every measure to help people out.
Cutting income taxes by 15% for the average worker and seniors, saving a working couple up to $2,000, rewarding hard work again. Because hard work is actually being punished. Is actually being punished because of the very high taxes. Now, the Liberals promised 10 years ago they would lower them. They actually raised taxes on 9 out of 10 Canadians. We need a change in this country because your hard work should once again pay off with a powerful paycheck that buys you an affordable home.
So you want to save
on
people
a safe
$2,000,
street, and that's what we will deliver.
You want to save people $2,000, but cut their dental care, which is thousands of dollars. Cut their child care, which is thousands of dollars. Cut pharmacare coverage, which is thousands of dollars. That's not a very good math deal right there. You're going to save people $2,000, but cost them tens of thousands of dollars. That's why you cannot afford Conservatives, and you certainly can't trust the Liberals on their own.
Mark Carney's turn.
You need New Democrats.
Mark Carney.
I'm going to reinforce that point, and then I'll respond to Mr. Blanchet. Childcare in this country, $3,000 to $10,000 a year for a family, depending on where you live.
Province, jurisdiction.
Depending on where you live, that's what's being saved there. $800 per trip to the dentist. We've expanded dental care to 8 million Canadians.
Because
8 million Canadians.
Because New Democrats
Pharmacare. These are fundamental issues for affordability. We're talking about affordability and taking them off in order.
That's why you need New
tax.
Quebec, that's not what I've said.
And in terms of
income taxes
working with Quebec
for Canadians,
yes, absolutely. Throughout the short time I've been Prime Minister, working directly with the Premier of Quebec, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, our Minister of Finance are from Quebec. Quebec and Quebec issues, whether it's
why
supply
haven't you answered Mr. Legault's letter? He asked 5 things in the letter. He reduced his expectations.
We're talking about,
and you did not even answer him. And tonight, you are so much in love with Quebec.
Steve, the question that Canadians have to ask:
why vote for Conservatives?
He's got the Mr. Singh. Sorry, he has the floor. Come
on. The question you have to ask is: after a decade of Liberal promises, can you afford food? Is your housing more affordable than it used to be? What is your cost of living like compared to what it was a decade ago? And are you prepared to elect the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal staffers all over again for a 4th term? Mr. Carney, Justin Trudeau's staffers are actually here with you at this debate in Montreal, writing the talking points that you are regurgitating into the microphone. How can we possibly believe that you are any different than the previous 10 years of Liberal government?
25 seconds left in this segment for you to respond to that.
Look, I do my own talking points. Thank you very much. The biggest risk we have to affordability, the biggest risk we have to this economy is Donald Trump. So first and foremost, we've got to get that right. Secondly, we need to do it in a way that brings everyone along together. That means preserving pharmacare, dental care, child care, reinforcing health care, spending our
intrusion in
clock
Quebec
is on-
jurisdiction
the-
over and again. I like
the
if
clock
you
is
were
on
any
zero.
better than we are.
The clock is
there
on zero.
one thing Canadians can do that Quebecers cannot do? You are doing intrusions in our jurisdiction with our money, pretending you are better, and most of the time you try to copy what we did with our own money against us. What's that as a policy? Don't you have your own things to care about?
That really is time for this segment. I wanted to be polite and let everybody finish their
But
points,
I'm
but
far behind,
we got to move
so
on.
I took the liberty.
Thank you. Okay, that ends section 2. Up next, public safety and security.
Fight crime, to protect Canadians, and to build communities that are safe, secure, and strong.
Keep crime, drugs, stolen cars, and other illegal substances out of our country.
We're going to invest in our borders, and that means hiring more border officers.
Resources are in short supply, not enough staff. This is not the nice way to treat people who come to our border.
Okay, same format, one-on-one questions and then open debate. Monsieur Blanchet, you get to go first in this one. Public safety and security. For a lot of people, that means the fentanyl crisis. I'd like to know what you could contribute to ending that crisis in this country.
The fentanyl crisis is a very serious issue, which is a bit less important in Quebec than it is in British Columbia. I think the whole border thing is the real issue. Immigration is a very important issue for Quebecers. Immigration has to be dealt with in an orderly fashion. Our borders are not dealt with in an orderly fashion. The rules are not respected. The rules are unclear. Some rules even invite people to hide for 2 weeks illegally before coming out. Some things has to be done. The situation of one person asking for asylum may take as much as 4 years without us reducing the number in order to deal with them in a human way. The services for every citizen in Quebec are being reduced because we cannot afford the fact that we are receiving much, much more people in Quebec from this specific type of immigration than we can afford, and we cannot teach them French.
That's time, Monsieur Blanchet. We can, of course, return to the immigration issue during open debate should you choose to. Mr. Carney, question for you. The Liberal gun buyback policy, not considered a success by many people. Reviving it is in your platform.
Yeah.
Why would it work this time?
Yeah, I think, well, what we've seen with that policy is some success at the commercial level, but not at the individual level, because it hasn't been, in my opinion, it hasn't been organized properly, and it needs to be organized properly. And I've instructed the Minister of National Security and Public Safety in order to do that. So part of this is a different focus of government, a focus on results, a focus on clear milestones in the short term. Let me make a broader point, though, on gun, which is that we have a problem with guns coming over borders, which is why we've tightened our borders. We have an issue, though, with a gun industry that is continually coming up with new forms of assault rifles, mass killing machines. We banned over 2,000 of these. Every single time there has been a vote in the House of Commons on gun control, Mr. Poilievre, unless you're tough on guns.
Mr. Poilievre, you can come back on that in the open debate if you want to, but my question for you in this segment is, Indigenous people are statistically overrepresented in our corrections system. Are you concerned that your tough on crime platform will make that worse?
I'm concerned that Indigenous people are disproportionately the victims of crime. I give you the example of a wonderful group of Indigenous people who came under attack in Saskatchewan, and many of them were murdered. Killer was out of jail after 60 prior convictions. This is the result of 10 years of liberal laws that allow the same offenders to be released dozens and dozens of times, even when it's known they are a danger. We can't risk a fourth liberal term of soft on crime policies. We need a change. And the Conservative plan for change will bring in a 3 strikes you're out law. 3 convictions for serious crimes, you go to jail for at least 10 years, maybe for life, no chance of parole or bail. We will bring in life sentences for traffickers of fentanyl, human beings, and guns, and we will secure our borders to keep the illegal
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. That's time. Mr. Singh, your question is about the RCMP, because you've got RCMP reform in your platform. What, in your view, is the problem with the RCMP?
Well, some of the basis for this is the concern that's been raised in more rural communities and northern communities that there have been some serious concerns about violence or inappropriate use of force when it comes to the execution of their duties. We want to make sure that we've got a top-tier police force that provides security and safety to those communities in a way that's sensitive and understanding of the communities they're serving. I also think what's very important is for Indigenous communities, Indigenous policing. This is an area of deep concern. I think everyone in our country should be safe. You should be able to be safe at home, safe when you go to work, safe if you take public transit, safe for your kids to be able to play in the local playground. And that's something I'm committed to. And the other area that I'm focused on when it comes to public safety is making sure we prevent crime before it happens. And that's why we want to see increased investments in our border security. We saw under the Conservatives, they cut 1,100 border officers in one day. So that prevented our ability to keep our borders safe. That stops those materials from
Mr.
coming
Singh,
into the
that's
country.
time. Not sure it was about the RCMP, but maybe we can get back to that during the open debate segment, which we go to right now. And Mr. Poilievre, you get the first word on this one. And it sort of dovetails on the last answer you gave, which is you have pledged to be the first prime minister in this country to use the notwithstanding clause, setting aside charter rights of, as you call them, multiple murderers. Why do you think that's necessary?
To be clear, I want to uphold the charter rights of Canadians under Section 7 to life, liberty, and security of the person. Right now, that right is violated by multiple murderers who are given discounts. The case in question was a gentleman who went into a mosque and shot dead 6 innocent worshipers. He got, according to this ruling, only one 25-year sentence, meaning he can be out in his 50s. He only serves 4 years for every murder that he carried out. That is outrageous. And I will use the constitutional powers that are created for this purpose to ensure that mass murderers stay in maximum security penitentiary for life. They will only come out in a box. We will also pass tough new laws that prevent repeat offenders from getting out. If you commit 3 offenses under the 3 strikes law I propose, you will not be allowed out of jail until you prove that you are drug-free, that you are behaved perfectly, and that you've learned an employable skill, and you've served a 10-year sentence. We cannot allow liberal crime and chaos to go on terrorizing our communities. What we need is a real plan for change so that we can bring back the safety and the security that Canadians used to take for granted.
Let me get Mr. Carney to respond to that. Do you think that's an appropriate use of the notwithstanding clause of the Charter?
I think that the one of the core responsibilities of the federal government, Prime Minister, is
under the 3 strike
fundamental.
Apologies, folks. I think we're having some technical difficulties here. We seem to have lost the feed, and we will try to get it back as soon as possible. I really apologize. I hope you stay with us. We are trying to sort this out as soon as possible to get us back to what I think so far has been the absolute best performance of his lifetime for Pierre Poilievre. I have never seen him shine in this way. I'm blown away. I think he's just absolutely knocking it out of the park. This is, in my opinion, the best
clause
Poilievre that we've ever seen. We're trying to figure out what's happened to the live
So if we cannot use it
here.
before,
And again,
and we
apologies.
cannot use it after, it
David,
means that
what
Mr.
do you think so
believes
far, the debate?
that we should never use it. But it is very important.
I think you're right. I think
and the fourth
Pierre's
case made
having
it clear. The
fantastic
Constitution
debate.
says
Singh is
how
trying
it
to cut
should
across
be
him a
used,
lot
but
in
never
order to gain
how
some kind of
or
traction.
what
But he's
we
being
will do
focused.
with it
He's being
because
solid.
it's the
He's
prerogative
delivered 3
of
or
the
4 really
provinces.
solid
So,
punches to Carney.
do you want?
And so has Blanchette, actually. So I think I think these 2 debates back to back are going to shift the numbers at this point. I don't think that Carney looks strong on his feet, and I think the accusation that he is Justin 2.0 has actually landed far better than I thought that it would on this. So
Yeah, Yves-Francois Blanchet, I think, had the line of the night. He said that, Mark Carney, you're trying to prove that you're different than Justin Trudeau, but you're supposed to prove that you're better than him, which is such a good point and such a good line. Unfortunately, it was hard to understand him because of his accent, but I thought that that was an incredibly strong line. I just have to comment that Jagmeet Singh is just so annoying. Like, I don't know what he's trying to accomplish, and he just keeps interrupting, and he won't let us watch the debate. And it's just at this point, like, incredibly frustrating.
He's struggling for relevance, and it's clear. It's almost like watching a guy who's a high school debater. He sort of plants a "please vote NDP because we care more" kind of line, and tries to cut across Pierre Poilievre in particular.
Absolutely. And again, folks, I promise we will get back to the live. If you want, you can open up another window and keep your eye on what's happening with the actual debate. And our producer here is just trying to figure out what the heck happened and get back to the live feed. And we will do that as soon as possible. But stay with us because we will have that back. And then we're going to have the post-debate show, which is what you're really going to want to watch with the independent journalists being able to ask questions. And I know this is a bit of a distraction, but we're getting lots of clips of the media getting into arguments, like legacy media journalists yelling at Keean Bexte and a kerfuffle with Ezra Levant there, and the CBC falsely reporting that he had his credentials revoked, even though he says that he does not. So lots of drama backstage, it looks like, at the leaders' debate. And hopefully we'll get that feed up any second now, so we can go back to the real thing. I know you guys don't want to be sitting here watching David and I, and we will get back to that live feed, and then we'll provide our full reaction after the show.
So that you don't get
there
hurt.
We go.
People are living in terror in many of our communities precisely because of the catch and release bail law, C-75, which requires judges release the accused at the earliest opportunity under the least onerous conditions. Every single member voted in favor of this bill, and they are all determined to keep it in place despite constant promises to the contrary. Mr. Carney, Canadians deserve to live in peace and security. That is the right that I'm fighting for a change.
I'm fighting for that as well. And let me be specific about two things that have been raised. The first is with respect to these issues of car theft, home invasion, and I'll use the GTA area where there has been sharp increase. How do you attack that? You attack it several ways. One, you increase the criminal penalties for that happening, particularly if you're part of a gang, particularly if you use a firearm.
And you will do that?
And we're doing so. We've committed to doing so. You put in place a reverse onus in terms of bail so that it has to be proven that there's not a risk, which we've also committed to. And then you go to what Mr. Singh was talking about, which is we have to reinforce our frontiers. That's why we're committing to an extra 1,000 Canada Border Service agents, an extra 1,000 RCMPs. That's why, as part of the broader fentanyl initiative, where we've added to the RCMP there, we've added drones, we're adding helicopters, we're adding surveillance, and we're going to the other end of the chain with respect to car theft, which is tightening security at the ports. This is what we need. In order to get results, you need to focus at both ends of the chains in federal.
Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about one of the issues that has come up is the idea of the public safety concerns around the overdose crisis and how this is devastating our communities. We're seeing so many lives being lost. In that, we know that one of the ways to address that is by investing in some of the solutions like mental health services and rehabilitation services. Services keep our communities safe, having access to those good services. Both Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre are proposing cutting government spending and cutting those services. That's not going to make our community safer. We need to see better investments in rehabilitation services, more investments in mental health. We need to respond to this serious crisis in our country with care and compassion. I met with Moms Stop the Harm, an organization of moms that have lost their children to this opioid overdose crisis. They've literally had their children have died because of this. And they're saying we need to do everything possible to save lives, to stop this death from happening. And I think we need to listen to those moms. And that's my commitment.
Mr. Blanchet.
Two things as rapidly as possible. First, we believe that we should act on crime gangs and organizations, defining them as we do for terrorist organization. We have to protect our kids from the violence of those gangs, from the drugs being sold by those gangs, from the guns and whatever else being stolen, sale being by those gangs.
Sold?
And not sold, being, you purchase a thing and selling, sold by those gangs. And we mostly have to protect our kids from being recruited by those gangs, becoming violent at 13 and 14 and 16 years old, because this is the real fear of parents like I am. This is a very dangerous situation. I want to come back to immigration because we said that we would come back to immigration. Do you remember the Century Initiative, a sad memory? Officially, they said that they had not considered Quebec difference. They had not considered Quebec language. They wanted Canada to be a 100 million people country by the end of the century. Mr. Barton told me himself that he had not even thought about the Quebec difference in that analysis. And one of his closest collaborators is now a close counselor to Mr. Carney, which seems to be part of that kind of project or ideology. So it is impossible for Canada to have all those people come into Canada. It is impossible for Quebec to receive all those people. And in Quebec, we have the language and values and secularity of the state issue, which is very important. So I say, pause. Let's do things properly. Let's receive migrants in an orderly fashion and successfully as a measure of respect for them also.
Mr. Poilievre, you wanted a word.
I speak to families all the time who are terrified by the scourge of drugs and illegal guns. And we know those guns are not Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle. So when the Liberals try to ban hunting rifles, they're really going after the wrong people. 90% of guns that come in that are used in crime are smuggled illegally over the porous, Liberal-run borders.
The border,
and that's why the
cut
police,
the border officers.
It's not true. And that's
you
why
literally
the police,
cut the border officers
the police
in the
actually,
facts.
if I could, the police actually endorsed
do it
me.
again,
The police in Barrie, in Peel, in Sault Ste. Marie have all endorsed me because they know that I will go after the gun smugglers and criminals with 2,000 extra frontline border guards that will stop the guns
After you
from
cut
coming
them,
in.
now you want to hire
But unlike the Liberals and NDP, I will not ban hunting rifles. The Liberals want to protect. I want to protect Canadians from criminals. The Liberals want to protect turkeys from hunters. I think we know which one makes the most
Mr. Carney,
sense.
quick intervention, Mr. Carney, then I got a question for each of you before this segment's out.
Okay. We absolutely fully support hunting and rights of hunters and Indigenous Canadians. But I want to raise an issue, which is a serious issue, talking about safety. There are people, we're in Montreal, in Toronto, across this country, who fear going to their synagogue, fear going to their community center, fear taking their children, leaving their children in school. And this has to stop. This is it's totally unacceptable. So what we're proposing is to make it a criminal offense to threaten or to impede anyone from being near or going to their place of worship, their school, their community center. It pains me that we have to do it, because this is not what we should be doing as Canadians, of course.
Okay.
But we will put that in place.
Let me
and this is a fundamental issue with respect
Let me
to
get 10
anti-Semitism.
seconds from each of you before this segment's out on what you perceive to be the biggest security threat to Canada right now. 10 seconds each. Mr. Poilievre.
The physical security threat to our country is the rampant crime wave that is running out of control. After the last decade, we had a 116% increase in gun crime. We need to lock up the criminals.
I got to hold you to
secure
10
the borders.
seconds. Mr. Carney?
Well, we're in a security section. I think we didn't have a chance to talk about anything internationally. I think the biggest security threat to Canada is China.
China, you say?
Yeah.
Mr. Singh?
Biggest security threat, illegal guns and drugs coming across the border, and cuts to services that would make our public safety and security even worse.
Last word to Monsieur Blanchet.
The fact that neither Quebec or Canada is able to protect itself, and that we are still dependent and entirely dependent on Americans to protect us.
Okay, that is the end of that section, gentlemen. Up next, energy and climate.
Improving pipelines, getting things built, unleashing production.
We are unlocking major infrastructure projects, including in conventional energy, oil and gas.
We're speaking thousands of dollars a year for each family to pay for the damages of climate change.
We can absolutely build important projects like an east-west energy grid.
Energy and climate change. I know how much all of you love talking about pipelines, so here we go. Mr. Singh, to you first. Should Canada build new pipelines to get our oil and gas to market?
Well, it's not an approach I favor with public money. There's not any projects that are on the table, so it's not a specific project to look at. I favor, when it comes to the environment, building an east-west energy grid that connects low-cost energy and allows for families to reduce their electricity costs. But let's put this all in context. We're talking about what our energy solutions are in the context of a climate crisis. And we're not just talking about a climate crisis in the far future. We're living it right now. I remember I met a mom a couple of years ago before I had kids who told me she was worried about taking her kids out on some days because of the forest fires in BC. It meant that it was unsafe for kids to go outdoors. Fast forward to when I became a parent just a couple of years after that, and I literally worry about the same thing. The forest fires we saw a couple of years ago meant that many places that didn't see this before saw days where there was such smoke in the air that it was dangerous for kids. We've seen extreme weather, forest fires, heat domes, floods impacting us. We've got to do everything we can to
Thank you,
protect our
Mr.
future.
Singh. That's time. Mr. Poilievre, where does fighting climate change land on your list of priorities when it comes to expanding energy opportunities in this country?
It lands within our priorities of bringing home jobs while bringing down emissions around the world. Look, the reality is that if we push production out of our country to more polluting countries, it actually makes the problem worse. But that has been exactly the Liberal approach with the anti-development law, C-69, blocking of 15 LNG export plants over the last 10 years. We have seen more of those jobs go abroad. I want to bring them home. My plan will be to approve, for example, natural gas liquefaction and export. If we sent our gas to India, for example, to displace half of their demand for electricity, we could reduce emissions by 2.5 billion tons, which is 3 times the total emissions of Canada. That's the way we bring emissions down and jobs up. It's common sense, and now it's time to bring it home.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. The next question is for Mr. Carney. How would your government fast-track pipelines and mining projects while also following the Supreme Court decision that requires consent of Indigenous communities?
Well, I think the first thing, and this goes back a bit to where we started, which is recognizing that we are in a crisis. We need to act with maximum force, and having a process and a consultation, but a consultation with a purpose, which is to identify those projects, those investments of national interest that are really going to move the dial in terms of growth, jobs, energy security, while being consistent with long-term competitiveness, which necessarily means lower carbon. And so part of that process is ensuring that First Nations, Indigenous peoples, are there from the start. It also includes their ability to participate fully in those projects. And that's why, and I know I can tell, like, you've got to tell on when I've gone on too long, so I'll finish up, which is, that's why we're doubling. Our proposal is to double the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program to $10 billion. What does that actually mean? It means an ability for them to invest equity in those projects
Carney,
and be full partners. Thank you.
My tell is my clock, and my clock is at 0, so that's how it goes. Monsieur Blanchet, do you still oppose pipeline construction in Quebec, even though a majority of Quebecers now apparently say they support it?
We will know about that when we have held the debate about that, which has not begun yet. We are just beginning it. First, we are hearing very creative numbers, and we are being fed nonsense. And we will be back to it in a few minutes. But energy, trade, commerce is from south to north or north to south. And it's true in Quebec also. In a little more than 3 years, Donald Trump won't be in office. And there will be not one more pipeline having been built once we get there. So let's be serious, responsible, and we will be back with the numbers. We don't want to pay in Quebec for such monstrosities which will provide us with nothing.
We now move to open debate, and you all will get a chance or have had a chance to get the first shot at this. Monsieur Blanchet, it is your turn to get the first shot. Canada has a substantial supply of critical minerals which are in high demand. Are you in favor of allowing these minerals to be mined?
Of course, it has to be done properly. Quebec has probably the most important clean phosphate reserves in North America. In Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, it is very important. It has to be exploited. This is the best way to use Paul Saguenay as an infrastructure that we need. We have lithium. Everybody needs lithium. Transportation has to be taken from oil to clean energy. This is what we want to be working on. It is part of the specifics of Quebec economy. So we are in favor of that, but we don't want to pay for the $30 billion which have been spent on oil and gas by the Liberals last year. It's $7 billion from Quebec. We don't want to pay for the $40 billion which have been spent by the Liberals on Trans Mountain. It's $9 billion from Quebec. Those are $16 billion of which not $1 has been spent in Quebec to develop a lot more power and wealth for Quebecers with our own money.
We need to let the leader of the Liberals respond.
Well, actually, I was going to pick up on the enormous opportunity that exists in Quebec, exists in Ontario, exists in the north of Canada, really exists across this great nation in terms of critical metals and minerals. We are have one of the biggest resources in this country. And it's not just an enormous economic opportunity, it is a strategic opportunity for Canada. So we have to make a decision, not just to develop it, but how do we develop it and who are our partners for it? Do we become more dependent on the United States, which is what they want? By the way, President Trump this week said he might put a tax on critical metals and minerals, just showing again the unreliable. If I may, and so the discussions
to negotiate.
So if I may finish.
Let's let him finish.
Let me finish. So the opportunity includes in Europe and includes in Asia as our partners. Last point. In order to get it done, we'll put in place a first and last mile fund. So these projects are connected to road and rail so they can go quickly to market. And we will have all of the other fast tracking measures in place that I talked about earlier in terms of capital, timing, approvals, so that we can move quickly, we can be stronger at home.
Always with the approval of
Mr. Singh has the floor.
We should absolutely take advantage of the fact that we've got incredible amounts of critical minerals in our country. And the way we do that is with any energy project or any project of this nature, make sure it's got the local community buy-in. It creates good jobs in communities, make sure we are meeting all our environmental needs, and we work with Indigenous partnership. And so I absolutely agree with that. I want to build on something Mr. Blanchet mentioned about the investments that this country has made. What I found very troubling is that the past number of years, the Liberal government record is one where we have spent the most subsidies compared to any other country in the G7 on subsidizing oil and gas. These are highly profitable companies.
You voted for it.
I think that's the wrong thing to do. We fought against it again and again.
No, you voted for it.
And then the Liberals have continued to do it. And so my question really to Mr. Carney is, will you commit to ending oil and gas subsidies? Yeah. We should be using that to invest in people, not giving it to highly profitable oil and gas companies.
Yeah, we talk.
I promise Mr. Poilievre the next, we'll come back and get that question answered. Mr. Poilievre.
Well, Mr. Carney, you point out that Donald Trump has a wrong-headed idea of putting a tax on our mines and our industry. And that is wrong. But so do you. You want to apply a massive industrial carbon tax on Canadian mines, Canadian steel mills, Canadian aluminum plants,
you want to let them
Canadian oil and gas. And your idea is to double the tax that Trump is applying by hitting them a second time. This will do nothing for the environment. It will actually ship our jobs south of the border,
so
just
plan is let
like
them as much
President
as they want.
Trump
Not a good
wants. My plan is to bring that production home here to Canada. For example, I will give a tax credit to low-emitting Canadian industry like Quebec's aluminum, for example, or British Columbia's natural gas, so that we not only bring home the production, but we do it below global average levels of emissions, so that we actually help the environment while bringing
wants to
home
let
the
big
jobs
polluters
for our
pollute
people
we have to let him
at the
finish.
same time. That is a sensible, pragmatic approach that puts us in charge of our economic destiny so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength for a change.
Mr. Carney, we've got. Hang on a second. I want to give you a chance to speak to Mr. Singh's criticism about oil and gas subsidies and Mr. Poilievre's criticism about the industrial carbon tax.
Okay, I'm going to make 3 points. I'll make 4 if you want me to respond to that, but I want to make 3. The first is that I answered this question last night, but I think the puck had already dropped in the Canadians game, so not everyone heard it. Yes, end to oil and gas subsidies.
That's why you need New Democrats.
Secondly, I would have done it independently. Secondly, recognizing that the biggest component of that was the cost of building Keystone, which is the pipeline which has helped to increase oil and gas oil exports rather by 50% in this country. That is an asset of the people of Canada. We own it. And the question of what to do it. So it's not a subsidy that has disappeared, it's actually an asset of Canada. Let me make a third point, though, in terms of where the oil and gas industry, particularly the oil industry, wants to and needs to go, which is to become low carbon in the production and transportation of oil. One of the big projects we need to move forward with is carbon capture and storage, the Pathways project, so that we have oil and gas that is competitive, not just today, 10 years from now and 20 years from now, as the world uses less. We want to have more market share. We need to do
Mr. Carney,
that. My government will move that.
But by definition, a subsidy isn't when we buy a pipeline. I'm talking about subsidies that go to oil and gas companies. Independent, separate from the country, oil and gas companies. That's what I'm talking about.
The figure you quoted last night included the cost of the pipeline.
Do you want to address
billions
his
of
point?
dollars are spending. We got to stop spending.
Sorry, can we get you to address his point about the industrial carbon tax?
How much will the industrial carbon tax add to the price of a car?
So the first thing I want to say is I'm going to address the broader point. Broader point is the entire absence of a climate plan from Mr. Poilievre, which, by the way, is going to put our industry and our country at a disadvantage as we're looking for new trading partners. Guess what? Most people want to deepen our partnership in Europe, in Asia. Those countries care about whether or not you've made progress. Second thing is, we're designing a program so that the big polluters pay Canadians at home for making responsible climate choices, for retrofitting their home, getting their emissions down, or improving otherwise. And that is smart climate policy. It's better for the big polluters, and it's better for Canadians.
Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Carney didn't answer my question. I asked how much would an industrial carbon tax on Canadian steel add to the price of a car. He won't answer because he knows that it will be very expensive because there's lots of steel in cars. Now, Mr. Carney has temporarily
But do you know the answer?
hidden the
You don't know the
carbon
answer
tax.
either. You're just throwing out random questions.
Thousands of
You're just
dollars.
making it up, though. You don't
extra
know.
costs.
I do know the answer to that question. He's wrong.
When you add taxes to steel, you raise the price of everything that uses steel. When you add taxes to the price, when you add the carbon tax onto the price of, for example, fertilizer, you increase the price of food. So while Mr. Carney has temporarily hidden the Liberal carbon tax at the pumps while keeping the tax fully in law and planning to raise it after the election, he's also going after a tax on our industry that will ultimately be passed on to you. After a lost Liberal decade of rising costs, we cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a new government that will fully axe the carbon tax, increase the jobs that we have here in Canada, and bring down your cost of living.
We got just a little over 3 minutes left in this segment. So, Mr. Singh, I want to ask you, do you think climate change is still a priority from Canadians? You're out there. What are you hearing?
Absolutely. You speak to any young person and they think, we're seeing climate crisis in front of us happening right now. You speak to seniors who say, we used to be able to live in our homes without air conditioning, and now we're seeing heat crises in communities that never had worries about extreme weather. We're seeing flooding, we're seeing forest fires like never before. We are living in a climate crisis. So Canadians are absolutely worried about it. As soon as we come into a summer, we start seeing those forest fires again. It's top of mind for Canadians because they're living it, they're seeing it. And I want those Canadians to know, Mr. Carney is not going to end those fossil fuel subsidies unless I'm there to fight back. Mr. Poilievre wants to let big polluters pollute as much as they want, poison our beautiful land, our water, and air. He wants to let them dump into our oceans. I'm going to fight back and defend our environment.
Monsieur Blanchet, on the issue of whether or not people still care about climate change.
I think people should be kept very informed about climate change because we are in a very strange denial situation about climate change, which still exists and is very expensive. And I'm sorry to crash your party, guys, but you are telling fairy tales. Clean oil and gas is a fairy tale. Large-scale carbon sequestration, sorry, I'm French, is a fairy tale. It does not exist. If Alberta wanted to exploit oil and gas and it were not a matter of pollution, I wouldn't mind at all. That's their business. Our own powerhouse in terms of energy in Quebec is clean energy. We are the best place in the world to achieve that. Our market is the northeastern part, Democrat part of United States. We want to keep our money to create wealth in Quebec for Quebecers. Let us be different because we can afford to be different.
Let me give, I will get to you because I said I would. But you've taken a couple of hits here, and I want to give you a chance to respond to some of the things the people on this side of the stage have said.
Thank you. Well, first of all, we do support protecting the environment. We want to ban the dumping of raw sewage into our waters. We want to hold large corporations to high environmental standards to protect our water and air. But we cannot do that by raising taxes and sending jobs overseas, as Mr. Carney is proposing to do. That has been the approach of the last 10 years of the Liberal government. What the biggest companies that develop our resources say is that we need to repeal the Liberal anti-development law C-69, a law Mr. Carney wants to keep in place. They say we need to repeal the industrial carbon tax and get rid of the Liberal energy cap. We need 6 months approvals in order to get to take back energy security and energy sovereignty.
We can summarize that. He wants to conclude as much as possible.
Hang on. Last word to Mr. Carney in this segment, please.
Thank you very much. You know, I was born in Fort Smith in the Northwest Territories, just north of what the oil sands became. When I was born and when I was growing up in Edmonton, early days, it was a fairy tale, quote unquote. But you know what happened? Canadian ingenuity, Canadian engineers, Canadian governments, both the federal government and the Alberta government got together and converted this.
The worst pollution in the world.
If I may.
The worst pollution
may I finish?
in the
May I
world.
finish? May I finish?
10 more seconds to finish, please. Let him finish his point.
That's the opportunity we have. That's the opportunity we have in carbon capture. That's the opportunity we have in small modular reactors. That's the opportunity we have in hydrogen beyond. This country can be a clean energy superpower. My government will help deliver it.
And that is time for this segment. Gentlemen, let us go to our final theme, which is called Leading in a Crisis.
Canadians know how to weather a storm. Canadians know how to get through a difficult time.
If, at the end of the day, we end up with the balance of power, Quebec is safer than it could be in any other scenario.
Now is not a time for weakness. Now is the time to take back control.
Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves.
Okay, leading in a crisis is a pretty broad theme that allows us to explore many different avenues here. So let's get to it. Mr. Carney, you get the first question this time. We haven't balanced a budget in this country in 17 years, and 10 of those years were under your party. You have pledged to get us to a balanced budget in 3 years. Question is, how?
So let me put this in the context of leading in a crisis, which is, in a crisis, you got to plan for the worst. Worst is that the U.S. actually does want to take us over. Secondly, you got to have a plan to build, and that'll include a fiscal plan, and I will get to that in a second. The third thing is you need to respond in a crisis with overwhelming force. You need to think big. You need to move rapidly. The things we've been discussing today are a subset of what we can and should do as a nation, and we can deliver. And government can play a role, but its role has to be catalytic. And so our approach is that we will slow the rate of spending. It's been growing at 9% a year, operational spending, program spending, away from transfers individual, 9% a year. We'll slow that to 2%. We will focus on a small amount of capital spending by the federal government in order to drive enormous private investment up to $500 billion by 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Ukraine surely constitutes a crisis. Leading in a time of crisis, Mr. Poilievre, question for you. If the United States withholds support from Ukraine going forward, do you believe Canada should commit more to assist?
I believe we should continue to support Ukraine. Our party supported donating missiles that the Canadian military was decommissioning. We supported funds and other armaments to back the Ukrainians in the defense of their sovereignty. We also need to rebuild our own Canadian military because the Russians want to make incursions into our waters. We'll be buying 4 massive Arctic icebreakers. I'll be opening the first Arctic base since the Cold War in Canada, CFB Iqaluit. We're going to double the size of the Arctic Rangers and fill the vacancies in our Canadian armed forces. We need a change to rebuild our military, which has been so disintegrated under the cuts and the mismanagement of the last 10 years. But we can have a change because we have the best soldiers, sailors, and airmen in the world, and they will have full backing from my government if you give me the honor of becoming Prime Minister.
I may come back to that one in the open forum because I'm not sure we got an answer about Ukraine on that one, but okay.
Well,
going on. Monsieur Blanchet.
The answer was yes.
We'll get more details, perhaps, as we go forward. Monsieur Blanchet, given the U.S. trade war, should any talk of a referendum on Quebec independence be put on pause?
That one is easy. It will happen only after the negotiation is over, and that's a good thing. I want to say I support the idea. We must help Ukraine, but we also must help the civilians of Gaza, and we must destroy Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. You know what? I don't want to be the leader of Canada. You will understand that. I don't want to be Prime Minister. But I can offer to be a partner, a responsible partner, a collaborative partner. If Quebec is respected in its differences, in its aluminum industry and lumberwood industry and culture and French language and values of secularity of the state, which is the price to be paid in order to have real equality, then if we are respected, we will be a partner, and then even Canada will be stronger in its negotiation against Donald Trump. This is what I am offering. Respect us.
Mr. Singh, I watched last night's debate. You seem very eager to talk about healthcare, so let's talk a little more healthcare right now. You have made many promises on healthcare. If a province says to you, we'll take your money for healthcare, but not your conditions on how to spend it, what do you do?
We've got to negotiate. We can't be giving away money without clear conditions. We're in a healthcare crisis right now, and a crisis that is hurting people across this country. People are waiting desperately in line in emergency rooms for hours and hours. Seniors are waiting for years and years to get the care that they need for surgeries that would remove pain or help them deal with mobility issues. We're in a serious crisis. Healthcare workers are burnt out. They are overstretched. And what we're seeing is more and more privatization, and that is hurting our public universal healthcare system. So we've got to fight back against it. We cannot allow our public money to go to a for-profit private clinic lining the pockets of a rich CEO or investors instead of going towards care. We need to make sure that we are investing in solutions where care gets to people, not profiting those at the very top. And so that's my commitment. I'm going to fight to make sure we defend our healthcare against the threats of Americanization and privatization.
Okay, we now go to open forum debate, and perhaps, Mr. Poilievre, you get the first word here. This might be a good time to put a little more flesh on the bone of what you think Canada could do for Ukraine if the U.S. backs out.
Yes, and my answer is that we should continue to support Ukraine. We don't need to follow the Americans in everything they do. When they're wrong, then we will stand on our own and with other allies. And with respect to Ukraine, that of course includes support with intelligence, equipment, armaments, but it also includes defunding Putin. Right now, Vladimir Putin has a monopoly on the European energy market because, frankly, the Liberals blocked exports of Canadian natural gas off the Atlantic coast. They blocked multiple projects. I would rapidly approve those projects on national security grounds so that we can actually ship Canadian natural gas over to Europe, break European dependence on Putin, defund the war, and turn dollars for dictators back into paychecks for our people.
Mr. Carney, you wanted to add?
Well, I want to go to the situation in Ukraine because it's very important. We've been a steadfast, Canada has been a steadfast ally, and Canadians have stepped up, welcoming Ukrainians into their homes and supporting them in other ways. In my first month as Prime Minister, we joined the Coalition of the Willing to support Ukraine as the U.S. stepped back. So led by France, the United Kingdom, with Ukraine, number European nations, Australia, ourselves, New Zealand. That's an example of how the new world is going to be. Canada participating in these areas and helping. It also means open trade. Mr. Poilievre voted against free trade agreement with Ukraine. It means aid for Ukraine. Mr. Poilievre wants to cut foreign aid, including for Ukraine, or not. He didn't mention support for aid for Ukraine. We have to stand by them. We have to be there, and this government has been.
Mr. Singh.
New Democrats absolutely support standing with Ukraine and will continue to do that. But I appreciate the opportunity in talking about leadership in crisis, talk about many of the crises that we're up against. And one of the crises we're up against in our country with the threat of Donald Trump, with the threat of the trade war, and with the privatization and Americanization of our healthcare system is the healthcare system. And what we have learned today, Mr. Carney mentioned slowing operation spending. That's a cut to services. He said his plan. He has a plan to balance the operating budget within 3 years. That's going to require massive cuts to spending. We calculated that at $43 billion in cuts. In fact, Rosemary Barton, when he was on the show on February 16th, he said he would cut spending. He said it would be in operations. He defined it as transfers in health. And finally, longtime Liberal and former House Leader Karina Gould said that Mr. Carney's plans would mean massive cuts. That's the only way to achieve it. So, Mr. Carney, do you think it is leadership to cut healthcare at a time when it is in crisis? I think it is wrong. We can't do that.
We will not cut transfers for healthcare. We will not cut healthcare spending, full stop.
But
we'll
Mr.
have
Carney,
a detail, if I may.
Who do we believe, Mr. Carney today, or the one he spoke on Rosemary Barton's show on February 16th? The one that repeated again that he would cut spending? Who do we believe?
If I may. Consistently said, we'll preserve all transfers to the provinces, including the increases. We will preserve all the transfers to individuals, I won't detail them all, but there. So we're looking at addressing an operational spend, which is about $150 billion. We will address that. We will make it more efficient, and we will do it in 3 years, and we'll balance that budget.
Monsieur Blanchet.
I am 6 minutes behind Mr. Carney, so I will speak a little bit longer. First, I will support any initiative which will bring Canada aligned with Europe and NATO in order to be stronger and facing new threats. Good. I believe that 2% won't be enough. I'm not more in favor of war than anybody else, but we have responsibilities, and our main ally is removing himself from the stage. So we have to step up. We have to do our part. I want to go somewhere else entirely, however. I want to ask Mr. Carney, if we're speaking about leadership here, if Quebec and Canada were to say, you are not being given a majority government, there will be more conservatives than you would like, maybe more New Democrats than you would like, and more people from the bloc than you would like. Will you accept, because you don't seem to be very eager about that, to deal with people which basically are more experienced than you are, as legitimate as you are, and would be more representative altogether than you would be being alone in your little kingdom? And I want also to propose to you all guys that 1 week after the election, we all meet, whatever the result, and we start dealing with this crisis together, because this is what people, either they are from Alberta or Quebec or wherever, this is what people expect from us.
Mr. Carney, is that something you could get behind?
I look forward to meeting with everyone. You're welcome to come, Steve, if you'd like. Week after crisis, but also, but in all seriousness,
that's not very respectful.
No, but I'll
that's
come.
Not very
but I'm
respectful.
coming. On peut jaser un peu. Okay, I will. Okay. I come to the.
On jase.
Yeah. Okay. I'll come to the core. Look, in a crisis, yes, you need a team, and you need to bring the country along with you. So what I did in the first week was to bring the premiers together, meet with all the Indigenous leaders, and move forward in that context. Now, the question is, who's going to lead out of this? Whoever leads out of this, if I may, Mr. Blanchet, merci, thank you. Whoever's going to lead out of this is going to need to work with all the provinces, work with Labour, work with Indigenous leaders, work with all Canadians to bring them forward in a united front. And if I make this last point, one of the things that has happened, which is a credit to those people at home, is that Canadians are coming together. And it's our responsibility to meet the strength of Canadian unity.
Still lagging. I have one small point to make.
Yep.
You will be elected, if you are elected in the parliament where there are other leaders. I don't know if he called you, or Mr. Poilievre, I don't know if he called you, but before yesterday, you have not spoken to me once, even if I proposed it so many times. But you say, I speak to provinces' leaders. You're not elected in provinces. You are in the parliament where people are to make decisions which might not always suit you, but this is democracy,
Blanchet, I'm
which
going to
you
jump
don't know
in.
too much about.
I'm going to jump in here because I'm noticing what the clock is saying, and you brought up Gaza earlier, and I think our audience would be interested in hearing your views on the other major international crisis facing the world
I just want to
right
get
now.
this, before we get that, just to finish up on the healthcare, I just want to speak to healthcare workers right now who are deeply worried about the status of our healthcare system, to Canadians who believe and love our universal public healthcare system, to patients who are stressed out. If you're worried about which Mr. Carney to believe, the one today or the one who spoke on previous shows and said he would
Mr.
cut,
Singh, I
vote for
think-
New Democrats, and we will fight to defend our healthcare.
I think your
we will never
supporters
let
would really
anyone
like
cut
to
it.
hear what you have to say about this question, and we have less than 5 minutes for it here. What role should Canada play in the other major international crisis in this world, in the Middle East and the war in Gaza? Pierre Poilievre, would you start us off on that? What role can Canada play?
Well, first of all, we must condemn Hamas, and more importantly, the terror sponsors in Tehran who initiated the attacks, the horrific attacks of October 7th. We need to defeat the terrorists so that all the peoples of the world can live in peace and defend the right of, yes, Palestinians to have their own lives free from the oppression of Hamas dictators and Iranian intervention, while Israel has the ability to live in freedom and peace. But I also want to say, we need to get back to the Canadian tradition, which is that when people come to this country, they leave foreign conflicts behind. The rampaging riots targeting Jewish communities is utterly unacceptable, and it points to the growing chaos that we see on our streets after 10 years of incredibly irresponsible liberal policies, of weak borders, of dividing people into groups, of saying one thing to one group and the opposite to another, dividing and conquering. We must end that division and unite our people so that everyone feels safe, and that when we come here, we put our foreign conflicts behind and we put Canada
not people.
first.
People
Singh,
come
please,
from
go
countries
ahead.
from around the world, and they care deeply about where they come from, and they should be able to do so. That's a part of being in our country, to have that freedom. Your treatment of Palestinians has been frankly disgusting. Your treatment of people who provide care and service for people in Gaza has been disgusting. On top of that, people in Israel and in Palestine deserve to live in peace and security. And Mr. Carney, to date, you've not acknowledged that what's going on in Gaza is now clearly become a genocide. It's important to call things out as they are, and you've not done that.
Mr. Carney.
We need to work, to go to your question, we need to work with our international partners, maximum pressure, maximum encouragement for an immediate ceasefire. That's the first thing. Encourage the return of all of the hostages, resumption of humanitarian aid. My government put in place $100 million of humanitarian aid, which is ready to go. With respect to where this ultimately goes, yes, two-state solution, but it has to be a viable and free Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security with the state of Israel. I will underscore one other thing. Mr. Poilievre rightly mentioned Iran, the Iranian sponsors in this region. We have to be clear-eyed about the fundamental risks of Iran and do everything with our international partners to check it and turn it.
Mr. Blanchet.
If we are to work together, we will have to be consistent. The Jewish community in Quebec and Canada is harassed by a very little minority of radical Islamists. And we don't do so much. The law in Canada says that somebody may invite people to be violent, to propose genocide against another people, if they can be hidden behind a religious motivation. They are in agreement with that, they are in agreement with that, they are in agreement with that. And we say it is a crime to invite people to violence and killing other people. And this is what is being done very often in Canada and Quebec with the approval of the Criminal Code of Canada. And we are saying this has to be changed. We have to change what we do before we want people elsewhere to change what they do.
Last minute in this segment, Mr. Poilievre.
This is about crises and leadership. And one crisis we have is in immigration. Because of this Liberal government's commitment to a radical policy called the Century Initiative, which seeks to bring our population up to 100 million people, they have allowed massive overcrowding in our communities. That has caused housing shortages, job shortages,
Don't blame immigration
and
for the
shortages.
fault of your government.
And if I could,
the fact that you did
sorry,
not
I didn't interrupt
housing,
you. I did
built
not interrupt
6
you,
homes.
sir. I did not interrupt you.
Don't blame.
I do not blame.
your
if I could,
failures.
Let him finish.
I do not blame immigrants. I blame the Liberal government, which brought this policy on. And Mr. Carney wants to continue with the Century Initiative. This is crazy. We have to get back to normal levels of immigration, get rid of the fraud in the temporary immigration system, and ensure that the people who come here can arrive in numbers that we can house, employ, and care for. That's how it always was, and that's how we're going to restore
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. That is our time for this segment. Those are our 5 themes, but we are not done yet. We are entering the next section of our debate tonight, what we're calling the leader's choice, something a little bit different. Each of you will get the chance to ask a question, any question, of any other leader. You can then debate the answer, and each one on one will last for 3 minutes. So, Mr. Singh, you have the first option here. Who do you want to ask your question of?
Mr. Carney.
Go for it.
Mr. Carney, as chair of Brookfield Investments, your company is one of the biggest tax dodgers in Canada. As chair, you approved decisions where Brookfield Investments bought up affordable homes, kicked out the tenants, and jacked up the rates. As prime minister, one of the first things you did was a tax cut that helped out mostly millionaires. And you have a plan to cut services for people. Now, I expect that of Mr. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. That's very much a conservative plan. But my concern is that doesn't sound like what people want for a Liberal leader. So my question to you is, Mr. Carney, whose side are you really on?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Singh. I'm on the side of Canadians. I'm in this for Canadians. I work for Canadians.
But your track record doesn't show that, though.
No, I have a track record of public service for this country. Go back to something Mr. Blanchet referenced earlier, which is have I resolved any crises? We're in Quebec. If you ask anyone in the finance industry, if you ask anyone in government in Quebec in 2008, they'll know that I resolved the biggest crisis in Quebec. Yeah,
you won't have fun.
But
60 million.
Hang on. This is for these two.
With Mr.
This is
Singh.
for these two.
Mr. Singh. Yes, I have had a long career in the private sector. I'm proud of that career. I've always acted with integrity, and it brings me with experience that I can apply
But no one's
in this
questioning
moment,
your integrity,
in moment
sir.
of crisis.
And you certainly have served the country. But the problem is who have you served? You've served to benefit those at the very top. You jacked up the price of homes for people living in affordable homes as a strategic decision. You dodged taxes. And then your decisions as prime minister show you're not prioritizing people, but you're prioritizing big business, billionaires.
So what have we done as a government directly? So we've gone directly to workers using all of our proceeds from the tariffs, committing all of them for workers, the workers most affected in
But the
industries.
employment insurance isn't
unlike
high enough.
others, unlike others who
But the amount,
plan
though,
to
let's talk about
use them to cut taxes. We are
the amount
focused
of
on.
EI is not high enough, though. You have to accept that. Right now,
there will be additional programs. I am fully confident that the next government, whatever government is formed, or certainly if I'm in the next government, we will make additional programs.
But you didn't do that
for
so
those
far,
workers.
though.
Well, I can't.
You couldn't,
given that we're in an election process.
You could have increased the amount, though.
May I make a core point here, if I may, which is that when you think about workers here today and people watching at home, particularly younger people, there is an enormous opportunity in the trades, in the skilled trades. We are going to build this country in a way that has not been seen before. We are literally talking about hundreds of thousands, not jobs, but careers in the trade. And that's why we're investing in apprenticeships and mid-career.
But I think people are worried, Mr. Carney, if New Democrats aren't there to force Liberals to make sure they remember about
of dollars were lent to lumberwood throughout the whole of Canada. I don't believe that's the right way to manage a crisis since you did not recoup the money from the car industry. Then, you have been the manager of Brookfield. It's supposed to be a green investment fund. But we now know that 50% of the investments of Brookfield is in fossil fuel. It's not so green. You seem to want to support oil and gas industry. That's interesting. You want to support prefab housing, and it's also in the investments of Brookfield, but not in Canada. You want to support nuclear power, smaller reactors, which are more dangerous, by the way, and Brookfield has investments in Westinghouse. You have hidden the money of Brookfield in Bermuda and Cayman Island, $30 billion. Billions of dollars lost for Canada. You are having your taxes being paid by families, workers, elders in Canada and Quebec instead of paying your own taxes. So I want to know, will you, before the election, reveal all the details of your assets, as Mr. Singh has done, as Mr. Poiliev has done, and as I have done? We have a right to know
let him answer.
under those circumstances.
Let's let him answer.
Well, the first thing is I want to say a word about. I'll say a word about Brookfield. You know, this is a Canadian success story. It is the largest infrastructure investor and developer in the world. It is one of the largest, if not the largest, developer of renewable power in the world. And who benefits from that? That's Canadian pensioners. That's Quebec pensioners. That is teachers. That firefighters. It is a series of people, including individuals on this stage, benefit from that. Now, always acted with integrity, served the shareholders of Brookfield when I was there. I have left that. I have followed all the rules well in advance.
So
I have followed all the rules well in advance.
Let's reveal your assets like we all did.
And working for the people of Canada.
What do you own? Why don't you tell Canadians and Quebecers what you own?
Monsieur Blanchet, we're moving on to Mr. Poiliev now, who has his opportunity to ask the question of whomever he'd like here, and that will be?
Mr. Carney. But if I could begin by setting the stage. The choice in this election is, after a lost Liberal decade of rising cost and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, do we want to elect them to a fourth term? Or do we want to change? Change so that you can afford food and homes. Change so that you can be safe on your street, and change so that your paycheck grows faster than your cost of living. Change with a new Conservative government. Because Mr. Carney is not change. Mr. Carney, in 2020, it was recorded, you began advising Justin Trudeau. It's still on the Liberal Party website today that you are Justin Trudeau's economic advisor. They might want to update your website on that. On June 3rd of 2021, you said that inflation would be a sign of economic progress. And you advised governments, including Justin Trudeau's, your Liberal government, to print money, which led to the worst inflation crisis in a generation. Now, that means that mothers went to bed with empty fridges and empty bank accounts, worried how they'd feed their kids, that seniors worried they'd be evicted from their homes, that young people believed they'd never be able to own a home in the first place. Now, in retrospect, you look back on the Liberal decisions that you advised Justin Trudeau to take. Will you look at the camera in the eye and apologize to the many people who suffered as a result of the inflationary policies that you advised Justin Trudeau to implement?
You know, I said earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I know you want to be running against Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau isn't here.
Are you denying you were his economic advisor?
I did not provide any of that advice. I did not provide any of that advice.
It's on the Liberal Party website. Are you accusing your Liberal Party of lying about your role? Because it says today you can go to the Liberal Party website now, and it says that you were Justin Trudeau's economic advisor.
The way you judge someone, in my view, is how they act, what they do when they have responsibility. Twice I was a central bank governor. And in both cases, if I may, in both cases when I was responsible for inflation, inflation was less than 2%. I'll add that when I was here responsible for the Bank of Canada, inflation was less than 2%. Our dollar was at parity. That is the kind of success that I can deliver for this country coming out of this crisis. And
You
what
were-
is at
you
stake
were-
here?
you were the
What is at
economic
stake here?
advisor
What is
to
at
Justin
stake
Trudeau
here?
that gave
If
us
we
the
bring
worst
it back, if I
inflation
may bring
that
it
we
back,
have had
if
in
I
a
may-
generation, because the
Could I bring
policies
it
that you
back? Could I
implemented
bring
and
it
those
back?
of the MPs that are
I am
still
going to bring
in
it
your
back
ministry.
to the
fellow Canadians,
crisis which
the
we
last
face.
10 years has been about the Liberals. The next 10 years should be about you.
And that's time. Mr. Carney, good news is the next question is yours.
Well, I'm going to ask myself a question. Actually, I'm going to ask a question which has been troubling me. And it's troubling me because, we are in a very dangerous and divided world.
Who is it to?
I'm going to ask a question of Mr. Poilievre. Why not? We're in a dangerous and divided world. We talked earlier about the challenges in the Middle East, the threats from Iran, threats from Russia, Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We have the threats from China, which I raised. We have the United States, which is fundamentally changing its security relationships, its commercial relationships. We have all this. And in the context of that, everyone on this stage, Mr. Blanchet, Mr. Singh, myself, we have our top secret security clearance. We have our top secret security clearance. I got mine within 3 weeks. It wasn't hard, but I felt it was important that I had it so I could be in a position to be informed about that dangerous world and take decisions at. And Mr. Poilievre, it is now 950 days, if my numbers are right, since you've had the opportunity to get your top secret security clearance, and you've refused. Why?
Well, first of all, I have got my security clearance when I was a minister. I got top secret clearance at the time, so there's no problem getting that. But when the government made this recent offer, they said that if I got the secret security clearance briefings, that I would be gagged under the security law, and I could be prosecuted if I spoke freely about matters of foreign interference. Now, given that Canada has experienced Chinese interference by Beijing, the government of China, in 2 consecutive elections, I needed to do my job to speak freely without fear of prosecution. And that was not something I would be allowed to do. Even Thomas Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP, said that when he was the leader of the opposition, he never would have accepted the kind of gag order that your government and Mr. Trudeau's government was attempting to impose on me. And it's good that I made that decision, because it has allowed me to speak freely about things like the case where one of your candidates, sir, actually said that he wanted to send a political opponent to China under a bounty threatening his life or imprisonment, and you refused to get rid of him. Now, it might have something to do with the fact that you went to China not long ago to get a $250 million loan for your company. But the reality is you refused to stand up for a Canadian who was being threatened by a foreign government. And I was able to speak freely on that matter because I refused the gag order that the Liberal government attempted to impose on me.
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. I think people at home have seen a robust debate here, and it's been a robust campaign, and it has not stopped Mr. Blanchet or Mr. Singh at times during his campaign by making challenges with respect to these issues. So one can address it. I will observe, as someone with the top secret security clearance, that China is not the only country that is accused of foreign interference. And
gentlemen, that is time
we'll leave
for
it
the
at
segment. That's our time. Now, closing statements are still a few minutes down the road, so we have a little bit of time for some quick hit Q&As for each of you right now. Short questions, 45 seconds, please, on the answers, and we're going to go left to right as I look at you right now. Mr. Poilievre, you get the first question. To the best of my knowledge, you have not offered a hard timeline, as the other parties have, to meet Canada's NATO commitment of 2% spending on defense. When would you hit that target?
My aim will be to 2030. That said, when we renegotiate our trade deal with the U.S., I know it's their priority to see us increase our military budget. One of the things I will say to the Americans is the more free trade, tariff-free free trade we have, the faster we can rebuild our military in Canada and reassert our sovereignty. And we will use that money to have heavy icebreakers in the north, Poseidon aircraft, fighter jets, a new base in the north, double the Arctic Rangers, fill the vacancies in the armed forces, and rebuild the warrior spirit that characterized our military since the birth of our country. We will rebuild our forces, and we will stand behind our veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Carney, your question. You have cut both the consumer carbon tax and the capital gains tax increase that you inherited from your predecessor. Is that an admission that the Liberals made life less affordable for Canadians?
I think let me give you the rationale behind both of those changes. First, with respect to the consumer carbon tax, in effect, it become too divisive for Canadians. Canadians received rebates. On the whole, they received more than the tax actually was. But some had represented that it was a tax without a rebate. It became divisive. It didn't serve its purpose. It made a relatively modest contribution to overall climate goals. I got rid of it. First act made Canadians whole. Secondly, but with respect to the capital gains tax, it's come up again. I'll be quick. This is a fundamental issue. We need to build this country. Builders, innovators, entrepreneurs need to be rewarded. That's why I brought it back.
And that's time. Thank you. Mr. Singh, would you change the existing cap on immigration?
I've said that the level of immigration, first of all, we need immigration. It's fundamentally important to our country. And we speak to any small business owner, you speak to people here in Quebec, you speak to farmers. It's fundamentally important. A couple of things, though, we know we need to be able to set the amount of folks that we welcome to our country at a level that it meets our needs. So I would ensure that we've got an expert panel that makes that determination based on our economic needs. We also know that we should be very clear that the lack of investment from Liberals and Conservatives resulted in the fact that we have a shortage in housing. That's something that we've got to fix. I should also point out that if you are worried about the cuts being proposed by Liberals and Conservatives, vote for New Democrats. We'll fight back to protect Canadians and make sure that we've got the right immigration levels.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. That's time. Mr. Blanchet, Quebec, I believe, is now the only province with a carbon tax. Do you think that's fair?
It's not entirely true. It's not a tax. What Quebec has is a system by which we invite big emission companies, I don't know how to translate that, to reduce their emissions. If they do not, then they have to pay. It goes into a fund which is invested then in reducing emissions. Our partner is California, which makes this a huge deal about reducing emissions. This is what we do. This is to be compared to what Europe does. And by the way, Europe would impose tariffs on Canadian oil if it ever got there. We're quite proud of that. And we have to be responsible because this is much less expensive than doing nothing to fight climate change.
That's time. We're going to do another set of quick hits here, left to right again, and 30 seconds this time. Monsieur Poilievre, you've previously promised to defund the CBC as one of your very first acts as Prime Minister. Is that still the plan?
Yes, CBC will continue to operate as a self-funded, Canadian-owned and controlled non-for-profit that raises money like other media organizations through sponsorships, subscriptions, advertising, licensing fees, and countless other things that will ensure Canadians who still want to listen and view its content will be able to do so. And at the same time, we'll allow freedom of the press so that everybody has their voice heard and they can make their own decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. The next question to you, 30 seconds. Would you remove some of Canada's legal tax avoidance loopholes that companies that you have worked for have used?
Look, I think that what we need to do is undertake a comprehensive review of our corporate tax system and do that on the basis of the right principles. We've got to have fairness, transparency, sustainability, and competitiveness. So we need a tax system, a corporate tax system, including being part of a international minimum corporate tax through the OECD.
And that is time. Mr. Singh, the question for you is, if you hold the balance of power after this election is over, what would your price be to support another party?
We've laid out our priorities. We want to make sure we bring down the cost of groceries, build homes that people can afford. I can also tell you that we would defend CBC, unlike Mr. Poilievre, who wants to cut it. And we would close tax loopholes and offshore tax havens, even though Mr. Carney didn't respond to that. And selling stocks and shares to make profits and then having less taxes on that is not hard work. And so those aren't the job creators. The people who are job creators are the hardworking men and women that contribute to our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Monsieur Blanchet, kind of the same question. If you hold the balance of power in the next minority parliament, if it is that, what would be the price of your support?
respect for Quebec. That's quite easy. I don't want to go against what Canada wants to do for itself, but I don't want Canada to impose an economic vision or a multiculturalist vision on Quebec, which is different in terms of language and values and secularity and equality between people. So I want to be a partner, and if Quebec is respected, Canada has nothing to fear from the bloc because we vote for what is good for Quebec. It only has to be good for Quebec.
Thank you, Monsieur Blanchet. Now, we have one last question for each of you. We'll go right to left this time as I look at you. Bit of an offbeat question. Monsieur Blanchet, what is your biggest regret during this campaign?
That's a very good question. I'm not very fond of regrets, I would say, but we should have started sooner to see that we had to create the environment for a deal in which Quebec and Canada would be, one bigger than the other, but partners to be stronger in front of Mr. Trump and showing that maybe nobody here is the partner to let go alone without being surveyed or controlled or supervised by a Quebec voice.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. Same question, Mr. Singh. Your biggest regret of this campaign?
Not being able to meet as many people as I would love to have. It's a short campaign, and so I can't get to as many communities that I wanted to. I think one of the honors of my job is to be able to meet people and to hear their stories, and then to take their stories and concerns and bring them to Ottawa and to fight for those people. And so I want you to know, even if I haven't made it to your community, I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that you're represented, that we never let any government cut our healthcare, that we defend the values that we care so deeply about. We make my life more affordable. That's my commitment to you. Even if I didn't get to see you, that's my commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Carney, same question. Biggest regret of the campaign?
I'm to be honest, it's the same answer. This is an astonishing country. It is an amazing country. And the opportunity and the responsibility that comes with it of being with Canadians, hearing their stories, their challenges, drawing strength and ideas from them, and working to be part of the solution is the greatest honor of my life. But the regret is that it is also a big country, and it is a short period of time.
Mr. Poilievre, last word to you.
I actually agree with these two gentlemen. I had a rule that at all my rallies, even when they're really big, I would stand in front of a flag and greet every single person and hear their stories and learn their struggles. And that was always touching to me, that they would put their faith in me or in any of us.
Yeah.
But we've been in such a rush because we have to get off to the next event, so we haven't been able to stop and do that. And I want you to know out there, I haven't forgot about you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. It is time now for closing statements, and prior to the debate, you drew lots as to which order we would go in, and Mr. Singh, you get the first word on a closing statement.
Certainly, thank you. Because you voted for New Democrats, we were able to build this country that we love. Universal health care and pensions, because you voted for us. Because you voted for New Democrats, we were able to fight to bring in dental care, pharmacare, and childcare. Because you voted for us, because you supported us. You have the power with your vote to send more New Democrats to Ottawa, to continue that fight, to make sure that no government cuts the things that we hold dear, like our health care, to ensure that we can do everything possible to make life more affordable by making it more affordable to buy your groceries and to get a home. I'm asking for your support in this election so that I can continue to fight to defend the things that make Canada, Canada, the things that we hold dear, the things that make us proud to be Canadian.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Carney.
We are facing the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. Donald Trump is trying to fundamentally change the world economy, the trading system. But really what he's trying to do to Canada, he's trying to break us so the U.S. can own us. They want our land, they want our resources, they want our water, they want our country. And we're all going to stand up against Donald Trump. I'm ready. I've managed crises over the years. I've built strong economies. We will fight back with counter tariffs. We will protect our workers and those businesses, and we will build the strongest economy. We will build Canada strong. I'm asking for your support, the honor of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Monsieur Blanchet.
For 260 years and a little bit more, les Français, devenus des Canadiens français, devenus des Québécois, You have tried to have them become Canadians like all Canadians. But to no avail, we are different. So let's be economic partners. Let's have a voice chosen by and for Quebecers, an ally for Canadians as equals in front of Mr. Trump.
Monsieur Poiliev.
Only in Canada could someone start where I began and get to this stage. I was born to a single mother and adopted by school teachers who raised me to believe in the incredible Canadian promise that anyone who worked hard could do anything. That promise feels broken today. Many of you worried about paying your bills, feeding your families, or ever even owning a home. You're worried your kids are in danger. But I'm here to say it doesn't have to be this way. With change, we can restore the Canadian promise so that hard work gets you a beautiful house on a safe street under a proud flag. We can do it with hope for a change.
Gentlemen, thank you for a very spirited debate tonight. 2 quick points before we go. Number one of you celebrated your 60th birthday yesterday on this stage. Yves-François Blanchet, bon anniversaire.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Secondly, you'll notice we didn't have to change the time of this debate because the Leafs already clinched the Atlantic Division title, and therefore we didn't need to move the debate to accommodate a hockey game. I'm getting back at my colleague who was in this position last night, and okay, go Habs go, that's fine. With that, we're done. Thank you, leaders, for being here tonight. We are just 11 days from Election Day, April 28th, but there are many ways that you can cast your ballot starting tomorrow at advanced polls. If you intend to vote by mail, that deadline is April 22nd. Make sure to check your voter card for details or contact Elections Canada. This is your democratic right, and we hope you use it. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Steve Paikin. Good night from Montreal.
Thank you. Enjoy that.
Bon anniversaire.
Just to share with you, the post-debate scrums have been canceled. They've been canceled. The Debates Commission, Leaders Debate Commission, announced that due to security concerns, they've decided that there will not be a media scrum. This is unbelievable, folks. This is an assault on our democracy, on freedom of speech and freedom of the press, because we all know damn well that there is no security threat in that building. If there was a security threat, that debate would be preempted and those leaders would be rushed off stage if there was actually a real security threat. The reality is that they cannot let their man and the Liberals face independent reporters again. They could not allow another night like last night with a bigger audience. The English debate obviously is much, much more watched than the French debate. So they pulled the plug on the entire thing. We're going to have Keean Bexte joining the line shortly to break it all down for us. And we know that the feed cut out about halfway through the debate. And so you had a little bit of commentary from myself and David. And I said that there was a lot of shenanigans going on. I was sort of watching it with one eye. I prefer to pay attention to the debate, and I thought I'll watch these clips later. But there was a kerfuffle that happened with a Hill Times reporter and Keean Bexte, and then the attention shifted over to Rebel News's Ezra Levant. And I mean, it was unhinged, folks. The media did not like the independent reporters. There is a revolt going on right now in independent media, where you have on one side the state-funded regime media, the bullies, who have no time and no patience for anyone who thinks differently than them. And then you have the beacon of hope and light, I believe, which is a small handful of people like Keean Bexte, like Alex Zoltan, like Ezra Levant. God bless them. They are in there putting a face for all of us. They are there for all of us. And I include myself in that. They're representing all of us, Canadians who want freedom, want democracy, want just diversity of thought. And you can see the bullying going on there. So we will provide commentary on the debate. We will talk about that, but I wanted to bring you that news because I know so many of us were just really looking forward to hearing some real questions from reporters. I know it's not about us. And I was telling my husband earlier, I actually really don't like when our reporters and when we become the subject of a story. Yeah, it's fun, and it makes it like a little bit more colorful, and we get to send out these heated emails and all that. But I would much prefer to just cover the politics of it and be able to just simply ask our questions and report on the news and the issues and the matters at play in this election. And it's a shame that the focus has to go from the debate, and we will talk about it. We will talk about it. I do think that was Pierre Poilievre at his absolute finest. I was texting with people, and it was like, this is the best I've ever seen from Pierre. I thought that was he knocked it out of the park. It was fantastic. But there is a sideshow, and that is that we're not. I mean, we're keeping it on the news. Maybe there will be some scrums. Maybe there'll be a way that our journalists find to get to some of these leaders and ask questions. They might have to, I don't know, try to find them on the streets. But just unbelievable that the Debates Commission would stoop so low that the journalists would pressure them. I mean, we showed that clip earlier of David Cochrane on the CBC interviewing the Debates Commission head, basically saying, how did you let that happen? How on earth did you let the rebel ask more questions than the CBC? And putting that pressure. And, you had the Debates Commissioner saying, well, there's only so much we can do, right? Like, we do have freedom of press in this country. And it was just so absurd to see that discussion, David. Let's just spend a minute talking about the Debates Commission, and then we can go back and talk about the actual debate.
Yeah, look, I think you saw the regime media challenged on the stage by Pierre Poilievre. I've never seen him speak so clearly or cleanly. I think his team must be thrilled. I mean, he was his best version in terms of being a guy that could take the messages and manage them real time. I thought that he was incredibly disciplined in the way that he remained unruffled by Singh, who was clearly trying to find a way in and was interrupting him constantly, but kind of made a fool of himself rather than actually changing the dynamic of the messaging. I thought Carney really took it on the chin a couple of times. The most important guy as an adversary for Carney turns out to be Blanchette, because it's not the dynamic everybody expects, which is Pierre Poilievre as the neck and neck with Carney taking him on. Blanchette is very direct on the tax havens, on the personal ethics dynamics, on the gaps between what gets said in English and French in different regions. And so I think, you saw on the stage the media narrative challenged, and then you saw in the backstage the media narrative being challenged by the presence of all these independent journalists that challenged what was going on yesterday, and the CBC CTV cartel can't take it. And I think Keean Bexte is to blame for for everything that happened, because he got to the front of the line, he asked some hard questions, and I just disagree with the characterization by people like Andrew Coyne, who I go for drinks with once in a while and talk to, and I think is smart on certain issues, but it's outrageous that these questions and these independent journalists, which are making the point of asking questions they know people are asking around the dinner table, are somehow out of line, or taking a platform for themselves. I heard the characterizations that are being used, and I think that you've got a media infrastructure that's teetering on the edge right now, and you can tell there's sort of an old dying format that's struggling to find a way forward. And you've got these young, vibrant, aggressive, interested, if you just take a profile of the people asking the questions and you kind of look at who they are and the kinds of questions they're asking, it's current, it's interesting, it's provocative, it's actually great theater, in addition to being interesting questions. And you look at the old stoic, tired Rosemary Barton, Andrew Coyne, you just sort of take a visual of the four usual type sort of Chantal Hébert kind of droning about what's happening in Canadian politics. It's just not that interesting. It's not catching people where they live. So good on Keean and Juno and True North and Rebel and others that are opening up people's minds by opening up the Overton window of the issues that should be discussed in this country. It's going to make us all better.
Well, absolutely. And we will get to those videos in a second. I want to go through some of the debate highlights. You mentioned that Jagmeet Singh was trying his best to throw everyone off guard. It didn't play well, though, from an audience perspective. Like he was doing his shtick where he was trying to throw people off, but it was jarring, and he kept doing it over and over and over again. And I think that most people viewing that, it just came across as annoying. It's like, okay, we get it, right? And he was unrelenting. Even the moderator, who I thought did a fairly decent job. Actually, I thought he did quite a good job. He at some points said, "Enough, Mr. Singh. It's not your turn right now." But to me, that just reeked of desperation. I thought that Mark Carney just seemed like flat. I don't know how else to describe it. Kind of boring, kind of aloof. It seemed like he didn't really have a strategy. I've heard this before, that he doesn't listen to his advisors. There was one moment that this was the knockout blow from Pierre Poilievre, and I think we have it, where he's telling the audience, are you better off than you were? The classic kind of thing that you'd say during an election campaign. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Are you better off than you were 9 years ago with the Liberals? Your house is more expensive, your groceries are more expensive. And then he turned to Carney and he said, you have the same team, you have the same MPs, you have the same cabinet ministers, and you even have the same liberal staffers showing up as Justin Trudeau did, writing your talking points. This was the moment that I think will be viewed the most on social media, and that's the interesting thing about these debates, is that most of the debate won't be watched in full like we just viewed it. It'll be viewed in these little snippets that will go viral, and this clip is already just going everywhere. So let's remind everyone of what it looked like.
People are living in terror in many of our communities precisely because of the catch and release bail law, C-75, which requires judges release the accused at the earliest opportunity under the least onerous conditions. Every single member of your Liberal caucus and your Liberal cabinet voted in favor of this bill, and they are all determined to keep it in place despite constant promises to the contrary. Mr. Carney, Canadians deserve to live in peace and security. That is the right that I'm fighting for a change.
Oh, whoops, I don't think that was the clip that I was talking about. Do we have the clip where he is talking about the fact that Mr. Carney has the same staff as Justin Trudeau had? He said they're even here in Montreal, and that they're writing those talking points for you. So do we have that clip? If we do, let's play that clip, please.
The question you have to ask is, after a decade of Liberal promises, can you afford food? Is your housing more affordable than it used to be? What is your cost of living like compared to what it was a decade ago? And are you prepared to elect the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal staffers all over again for a fourth term? Mr. Carney, Justin Trudeau's staffers are actually here with you at this debate in Montreal, writing the talking points that you are regurgitating into the microphone. How can we possibly believe that you are any different than the previous 10 years of Liberal government?
25 seconds left in this segment for you to respond to that.
Look, I do my own talking points. Thank you very much.
So I thought that was the strongest moment. That's the moment that will go viral. And I just wanted to mention, it's interesting that he says, I do my own talking points. I have heard that he doesn't like taking advice from people. And that might be part of the frustration that his team has with him, that he thinks he's smarter than everybody. But I like that line about they're writing your talking points that you're regurgitating. Yeah, I didn't think that Mark Carney had a very good night. And I think that really, like, the energy, the difference, the sort of generational difference. Pierre is younger, more vibrant, more energetic. We talked about it before the show started, David, that people who have hope in Canada, people who are optimistic about the future, are on the side of Pierre Poilievre. People who are afraid and full of fear say that they're voting for Mark Carney. That kind of played out for me, because the other thing was that Mark Carney, he must have said the word crisis 100 times on stage. Like, everything was a crisis, right? We have a climate crisis, we have a cost of living crisis, we have a trade crisis, there's a crisis in the Middle East. Like, it was really, he was really laying it on pretty thick, that that when Canadians think of crisis and they think that they're in danger, that he knows that he's the one that they are thinking of. And he really played that up. But I think, again, that it was Pierre's night, and I think he did what he had to do. What do you think?
100%. Look, I think you're right. What was so interesting, we had the conversation at the top of the debate, and partway through, Pierre actually said hope a few times, very specifically when he was talking about his agenda and what he wanted to encourage in people. And you're right, Mark Carney, even the closing statements were kind of interesting because in a way, the conservative narrative has had to be about the liberal lost decade, which is a negative, theme with conservative principles and ideas being a solution. And the liberals can't run on their record, and so their goal is to kind of create a negative storyline about Canada's future vis-a-vis Trump, and so it's a Trump crisis. But I think what you see with Mark Carney is the classic sort of left perspective that a crisis is too good a thing to waste, and what they mean by waste is it's an opportunity to impose more state control, more government regulation, higher taxes, more borrowing, more getting out of, more getting out of whatever the crisis is by expanding the government, expanding the debt burden that'll be on the next generation. And it's not a very, it's a story that works if you buy the crisis. If you don't buy the crisis, it's not a story that works very well. I actually think the problem for Mark Carney that became apparent during this debate is that already a lot of his themes are dated. You could sort of feel that the wheel is turned over the course of this last few weeks on Donald Trump as a crisis. And it sounds a little stale. I don't think people are feeling that Donald Trump is the crisis right now. I think if I were to say that I think affordability, the cost of living, you could see it reflected in what Singh was saying. You could see it a little bit reflected in Blanchette. You could see Carney sort of hammering the lines that he's been using in these sort of scripted campaign meetings. But there's this problem for that scripting, which is Pierre's been pretty good at, he started very much wrong-footed by the end of February through most of March and April. But you can see him coming back now. And I think that I have a sense, and again, I think you and I have to be careful that we're not too confident that the person that we want to have win is getting it right, and the people that we don't want to have do well is getting it wrong. We've got to be as clear-eyed as possible. But I think it'd be hard for anybody to look at this debate and say Carney did great and Pierre didn't do well. I think Pierre's going to come out clearly ahead in the way this is evaluated. I think Singh is done. I really think that he put a nail in his own coffin last night in the way that he handled those two journalists from Rebel News. I thought his response was disgusting. I think it's anti-democratic. I think it was a form of kind of passive-aggressive thuggery. And I found tonight he just seemed juvenile. He was completely out of his depth. He didn't deserve to be on the stage, and he acted in a manner that just seemed like he was the only non-adult in the room. Blanchette was a surprise for me in the way he responded. And Carney, I think, went in with high expectations. If you looked at the polling markets and sort of how people thought it would go, the expectation was that Carney would be the winner of the debate. It was sort of 43% to 28% or something. And, I think that he underperformed his expectations. I think Pierre overperformed. And I think that Pierre managed to give a lot of hits, but not come across as unfriendly or unlikable in the process. That's a tough.
Quite the contrary. He came across very human. And I think that the closing statement really represented that. It sounded like he was close to tears. The statement right before the closing statement, where he was talking about how he regretted not being able to talk to everyone in the campaign. It reminded me, there was a video that I think was maybe from 10 months ago or something like that. And he was speaking in the House of Commons, but it wasn't during question period. It was a longer speech that he gave afterwards. And he was talking about how, there's two groups of people that he meets on the campaign trail. One that say, look, if you don't win this next election, I'm going to leave Canada. And he said that bothers him, but those aren't the people he's worried about. He's worried about the people who say, like, you have to win. And like, they don't have the choice of moving countries. Like they actually are just like at the very end. And he describes a woman who is working 3 jobs, then her car got stolen. Anyway, it was that was like the best Pierre Poilievre. And we saw kind of a glimpse of that when he was talking about how he really likes to talk to people. And I remember talking to Preston Manning about this, that the way that you get as a politician, the way that you gain your skill in understanding the people is really going to events and speaking at rallies and speaking to people, because you're basically testing out ideas and you're getting feedback in real time, right? So you start to see like which issues really resonate. You're watching the audience, people nodding their head, people seeing it. Preston Manning was, this was during COVID, and he was talking about how hard it is to campaign in an era of COVID when you're doing everything through Zoom, that you just kind of lose touch with the public. And in some ways it reminds me of this campaign, because I just don't think that Mark Carney does that. I think that he is used to speaking kind of on a teleprompter to in corporate comms world, Davos. Like he's not used to actually connecting with people. He's used to making policy from far away and dictating it. And you kind of contrast that with Pierre Poilievre, and he gets called a populist, and he they kind of use it as a slur, like, oh, these big rallies or Trumpian or whatever. But really quite the opposite. Like Pierre is interacting with so many Canadians. He's learning so much about the country. He's hearing so many people's stories, and he's using that. He's a smart guy. He's using that to craft his policies. So I think that all of his policies come from a place of real concern and real interactions with people. And that really came through when he kind of like almost teared up when he was talking about how he hasn't had the opportunity to shake hands with everyone who comes to his rallies because they're off to the next thing. From my perspective, he should have blamed Mark Carney for that and say, why did you make it such a short campaign? Why did we do the shortest possible campaign? Why didn't you let us have a real lengthy election with multiple debates? And so we would have had more time to meet Canadians. Probably good that he didn't go that way. He kept it real and raw and authentic. But I thought that was a very strong human moment. And I think Pierre actually, for all the media criticism that he's kind of mean and he's a bully or whatever, I see the opposite. I see someone like who's very raw and authentic and real. And I think that Pierre really, performed well in that regard. I want to just mention a few other kind of interesting highlights. There was one moment where Pierre Poilievre was talking about how Mark Carney was the economic advisor to Justin Trudeau, and Carney kind of denied it, which was weird because it's like kind of a well-established fact. I mean, there's lots of pictures of them together. There's lots of news articles dating back to 2020 where the press described that Carney was advising Trudeau, sorry, and then Pierre Poilievre says, look, if you don't believe me, go on the website, go on the Liberal Party website. Yeah. And apparently the website like crashed, or maybe they took it down. Like the Liberals took the website down because they didn't want they didn't want anyone to know, which I think is sort of like par for the course for the Liberals. Like they're like, oh no, we don't want to get caught, so let's just kill the website. But I thought that was a good moment. I want to ask you though, you said that Blanchette sort of surprised you tonight. So can you just describe what you meant by that?
Well, look, I think when you go into, if you sort of said, if you hadn't just seen the debate and you said, okay, how's this debate going to go? The one question you've got is, we got a guy here who's running a separatist party in Quebec. This debate is going to be focused on a series of themes that are sort of pan-Canadian. How's he going to make himself relevant in this debate? How is he going to manage the topics and the framing that matters? What I found interesting about him was he was able to comment, and I found this particularly with respect to Mark Carney. He just kept sort of punching at the fact that there was something wrong with the whole dynamic of the Mark Carney storyline, right? The offshoring, the issues with taxes, the issues around how he was presenting himself in two different places in two very different ways. And he was sort of constantly reminding people, hey, this is a federalist country. Don't tell me about things that you're going to do federally that actually belong to the provinces like Quebec. Don't spend our money on things that are federal priorities when that's Quebec money. And what's interesting to me about that is if you had replaced him with a lot of people that sort of think from the same perspective in Alberta, you would see people actually endorsing not the Quebec perspective so much as just the federalist perspective. Mark Carney, Jagmeet Singh constantly make promises from a federal point of view when actually the jurisdiction they're talking about is definitely provincial. And I think that is one part of the entire sort of Liberal NDP 10 years of overreach that Blanchette wasn't going to be tolerant of. And that ended up being an important theme. It's sort of a surprising one. I think the personal direction that the comments that he made to Mark Carney took were surprising because those were delivering a much tougher punch than if they came from Pierre Poilievre, just because the source is somebody you consider to be pretty independent in the way that he managed it. My guess is that his team had some micro polling coming out of the French debate that showed him that he's on the rise in Quebec, and that a lot of Quebecers have had it with the Mark Carney storyline. It wouldn't surprise me at all if what he'd heard was, you know, and the difference in the temperaments you see between the two nights is kind of instructive. I think Singh was told, you just disappeared. You weren't even in the game. You need to make yourself relevant. And I think because he's sort of a Jew, I don't know how he processed that insight, but I think he seemed to interpret that to mean that he should interrupt everybody and act like a 5-year-old on the stage. Yeah. So I think he buried himself where I'm sure his team was smacking their foreheads being like, not like that, you know? But Blanchette was very interesting to me. Like, if you had said before the debate, here's how you think it'll go, I wouldn't have guessed that he would have taken the lines that he took, everything that he directed straight at Mark Carney. He ignored Singh except to make a couple points about federalism. It's directed at Mark Carney. Mark Carney started to shrink in the spotlight tonight. Mm-hmm. And I think if you had said, what's the expectation? The expectation was he's going to struggle in French, and he did slightly better than people thought. He's going to do great in the English language debate. He's going to be poised. He's going to look like the senior government technocrat that understands how to keep people safe. And instead, he wavered on a lot of stuff. He even cross-talked himself a few times. He wasn't sure exactly where he was going to go on some responses. And the surprise to me was that Pierre looked confident and kind of happy. And I think partway through, it probably dawned on Pierre, I'm winning this. Because by the end, he was winning it. And the point you made about him being emotional, I actually thought it was interesting that all three, to Jagmeet Singh's credit, as much as I just could not stand his dynamics yesterday or his interactions, he is a guy that clearly spends a lot of time with people, listening to people and talking to people. And you got to give him that. And I think that when he was asked that question, what's your regret? There was sort of a stumble bumpkin approach by him that I just think he's so unprofessional. But it did represent a certain kind of heartfelt, this is somebody that spends a lot of time listening to people. And I think Mark Carney picked up on that. And then when Pierre picked up on it, the three of them basically said the same thing. It's a great country full of great people that have hopes and dreams tied up in what we're doing here on this stage and the promises we're making. We hope that they understand we couldn't connect with everybody the way we want to. That kind of thematic, I think, was an amazing way to finish the night. I think it was a credit to all four leaders, the way they responded. I got to say one more thing, Candace, if I'm not going on too long for you here, which is
no, go for it.
This moderator, Steve Paikin, is a pro.
I agree.
If it was me, I probably would have had it with Jagmeet Singh after like the 5th time. Just be like, Jagmeet, let's just pause for a second, right? Stop talking through other people. Wait your turn. And I'm sure Steve Paikin's done, he's got 10,000 hours. Both he and the moderator yesterday managed to make these debates really super interesting to watch. And I think the Canadians do debates better than the Americans. I think there's more engagement. I think there's more dynamism to the conversation. I think if you could take out Singh just doing these random interactions and interruptions, you would have had an almost pitch perfect debate in terms of just pulling the purpose of the debate, pulling out what are the key differences between these people, what evidence in the way that they respond to questions kind of reveals something about their character, strengths and weaknesses. And then gives you the insight you need to make the right kind of judgment. I think Mark Carney came out as the technocrat that he is, for better or for worse. Some people will like that, other people won't. But it was kind of pulled out in the course of the debate. And I thought that the structure of the debate, the way that it was moderated, struck me as eminently fair, straightforward. And as a conservative, I'm sort of used to being ready to be like irritated by the fact the debate took a certain spin or the questions had a certain kind of framing to them.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, David. We do have Keean on the line, and so we're going to shift focus a little bit and go from talking about the debate itself, which I think I absolutely agree with the idea that it was very well moderated. But let's talk about the drama. Let's talk about the juicy stuff. Keean, are you on the line here?
I am. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can't see you, but I can hear you. So let's try to figure out your video here.
All right, I'm not
And
sure. I'll just sort of describe the situation here. If you
okay,
can hear me all right, the
sure.
video might not work, but
Okay.
I'm here standing outside of Rosemary Barton's tent, where she has had armed security guards added to a security perimeter around her to sort of boost this perception that something unsafe is happening at this debate. It's absolutely clownish what's going on here right now, and you'll see in piecemeal what you can on X right now of people who have posted what happened inside the media room when alt-left journalists lost their mind and started attacking Ezra Levant. They also threw my name around a little bit, accusing me of working for Rebel News, like there's some grand conspiracy with Ezra Levant at the helm of it. It was absolutely one of the strangest moments of my life. Chaotic is, it doesn't do it justice, doesn't describe enough how rabid these journalists were. You'll see videos that I don't know if we can throw to right now, but you'll see videos of Ezra coming in and out of the media room and the gaggle of alt-left journalists surrounding him, pestering him, screaming at him. One of them was with the Hill Times, who came up to me and started attacking me because as I was discussing with my colleague Ellie with the Hub, the question I was going to ask Mark Carney, which was pretty clear and pretty fair, about Ryan Turnbull, his candidate, who called gay men perverse. And I'm not going to say the F slur that he used. It's so hateful that you'll have to go read the story at junonews.com. But he said it, and he apologized for it after I threatened to ask Mark Carney about it at the debate. And as I discussed this with Ellie, this Hill Times reporter stands up, turns around, and crashes out, saying that it's totally unfair for me to even bring this up, that it's not an accurate question, that I'm not reflecting what Ryan Turnbull said in his Facebook thread when he was 30 years old. Absolutely garbage response. You can tell that they're running protection for the Liberal Party, because this was going to be a very damaging question that we asked Mark Carney, and I would have asked it of Jagmeet Singh if he had a candidate who was as hateful as Ryan Turnbull. But this Hill Times reporter, he identified that this would have been a dangerous question for Mark Carney, and he raised a stink. He crashed out unbelievably. I've posted it on X. I don't know if we can throw to it. Can you tell me if you can throw to it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we do have this video. So let me just figure out what the thing is. This is, this is video A, Sean. So if we can play Keean's first video here, please.
You'll see what he does is he tries to defend the use of the term, and
things get homoerotic / because for plausible deniability. Also, the dudes are being kind of homophobic. That's what.
Do you have friends that get pretty homophobic at times?
Yeah, most of my gay friends.
Most of your gay friends.
Do you know how much? Do you know how fast? What was it? What was the F thing he used?
You say it.
He said, yeah.
Was it fagotization?
Yeah.
That's run through my gay friends like wildfire. They
Fagotization.
Love that. They love it.
They love fagotization.
They think it's the funniest word they've heard in a while.
So Ryan Turnbull.
Doing this voice doesn't actually.
So
work.
Ryan Turnbull. No, I'm not. I'm curious. What, do you just think that politicians should be off the hook for saying stuff like this?
What? 15 years ago? How long ago?
He was 30.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
so
who are you?
He wasn't a politician, so he was. This is when he was.
He was a 30-year-old man.
Okay.
Who called gay men perverse.
Yeah, I think I've read through your story, and I know you don't even believe that that's what he said.
Oh, I 100% because I read it. I read it that's what he said.
It too. And you're
okay.
So you're very, I mean, you don't have any sort of morals or scruples. So
okay.
You just throw it wherever you want. But I read it, and I know you're actually smarter than you pretend to be. So I know you know what he was.
So he typed the words on Facebook: perverse fagotization. Referring to gay men. No, just calm down for a second, guys.
No, I know, but I want you to be honest.
So he said perverse fagotization, referring to homosexual men, and you think that that's an acceptable type of language for politicians to use?
Oh, well, he wasn't a politician.
No, that wasn't the only thing that he said.
Yeah,
he said
I read
lot.
Through what he said.
He said a lot of extremely homophobic stuff, and just because he's a liberal, you're trying to defend him.
No.
If this was a conservative,
so if it was a conservative, you would call for him to be removed, like Aaron Gunn.
Oh, absolutely, but Aaron Gunn hasn't said something like that.
So just to add some context to this was in a room as quiet as a library. The debates were about to start. It was dead quiet. And this man turns around and crashes out. And frankly, maybe we don't have time to get to the whole thing. It gets worse. He stands up from that point and turns the conversation to Ezra Levant and accuses him of just crazy asinine things, of funding this like grand conspiracy against Mark Carney. It was pathetic. It was strange. Anyone interested can go to my Twitter page and watch the entire crash out, along with other crash outs from reporters from Ricochet Media, another alt-left journalistic rag, more like a blog, I suppose. It was absolutely a zoo in there. I don't know how long the Debates Commission is going to survive after what happened here in Montreal.
Well, it's interesting, Keean, because I'm not sure if you saw this, but on CBC, maybe an hour before the debate started, David Cochrane was interviewing the head of the Debates Commission and was scolding him and was saying, how did you allow the Rebel to ask more questions than the CBC? Like, how dare you? And the
But that was a lie.
That
was a lie.
Right. Well, of course, because the CBC moderated the entire debate. So
But the CBC also asked 4 questions at the debate last night. Rebel News also asked 4. Juno News asked 1. True North asked 1 as well. So this idea that Rebel had more questions than the CBC is just patently false. And it's this narrative that they're trying to create, like this entire country is somehow run by right-wing journalists, which is just such a fabrication. It's pathetic. And they can feel Candace, and they're standing behind me, so I hope they can hear me. They can feel the grasp slipping out of their hand, the grasp that they have over the Canadian zeitgeist. It's slipping. They know that their jobs are on the line, and they're desperate. They're so desperate to the point that they're having these theatrics. You can see these police officers here standing, these armed guards that they have protecting Rosemary Barton and David Cochrane like they're the prime minister. This is like Pravda level stuff. They protect journalists in Russia like this because they know the people hate them so much. And they're trying to play up these theatrics, and it's pathetic.
Well, they really are. Like they're taking away from the actual debate.
This is just the scene setter. I don't know if you guys lost me, but I'll just sort of tour you around what this campus looks like. They're projecting the debates up here, and these are the tents that they have set up. Mainstream media outlets like CTV, CBC, and Global News, and inside in this big hall behind me is the media room. Did you guys lose me here?
No, you're still there. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so the media room is behind me. I could go in there and show you guys, just if you're curious. Maybe do it on the live stream, but you guys can continue what you're doing, and I'll walk in there.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
You lit them on fire by asking those questions yesterday, and you've got them all riled up.
Yeah, definitely. They were upset, and I think what they were upset about was that the questions were extremely fair. They weren't gotcha questions. They were questions that the mainstream media could ask. They just refused to ask. I'm just going to run in here. We're getting in the door.
They're the questions that Canadians talk about around the dinner table at night.
Yeah,
well, that's why they had to keep calling us far right? So like every time you watch the CBC, every clip that we saw with them reacting to the debate, it was like, just audience, just so you know, these are right-wing people. And they wouldn't even call us journalists. These are right-wing media groups. And it's like, why do you have to use that qualifier, right? Like, why do you have to describe us that way? Because you're trying to undermine our credibility. Because if you just let your own viewers watch from their own perspective, they might say, oh, those are interesting questions, and not even really think about the fact that they're outside of what the legacy media deems appropriate, because to everyday Canadians, they're just normal questions, right? Like Keean Bexte asking Mark Carney whether he thought Prime Minister Trudeau was a good prime minister. Like that is a question that any journalist could and should ask. It wasn't beyond the pale in any way. It was a great question. And the way that Mark Carney reacted was very telling. And so the fact that they had to interject to say that was a right-wing media. It's like, obviously they're just very threatened by the competition, and they're trying very hard to discredit us. Stephen Taylor on X, he has a clip of the 3, Adrian Arsenault, Rosemary Barton, and David Cochrane. And the caption reads, CBC blames rage farming and narrow political gain and financial benefit for a very small group of people. That is the reason for canceling the post-debate scrum.
Can you hear me all right, Candace?
Oh, we got Keean back. Yeah, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I have Sheila here, Sheila Gunn Reid. She's with
Sheila.
Rebel News, and we're in the press room right now with the rest of the mainstream media and some independent media as well. Right after they canceled the scrum that has happened successfully at every single leadership debate that we've been to over the last 8 years now, I suppose. Can you just give us some takeaways of what you saw here? I tried to describe the zoo that was created by some alt-left journalists who are crashing out about Ezra being here and you being here. Can you describe what it is you saw?
I've never seen anything like it. And it started yesterday. And it was tolerated yesterday. And to the credit of the independent journalists, my team, your team, we conducted ourselves with comportment and dignity in the face of heckling, jeering. Some were throwing papers in the back, swearing at us. I've described it as absolute buffoonery. Just poor behavior you wouldn't expect from a professional, let alone an adult. That's what we were subjected to yesterday. And they didn't like that we got those questions in. And, you know, many of them have wondered, how did they get those questions in? Well, I stood up out of my chair and I ambulated about 18 inches to my left, and there I was in the line. Everybody else in here could have done that. I hope they hear me saying these things.
Can you describe what you were mentioning about Lincoln outside?
Sure, I will tell you. After the, you know, I said to our team, everybody be ready with your phones, because the scrum is canceled and these people are gonna pop off and they are gonna blame us for it. Instead of the debates commission, the pressure they put on the debates commission, their own intolerance of independent journalists, that's really what's to blame here. But I knew that they would turn on us. And just the second that the scrums were canceled, the room just erupted with rage against us. Left-wing subsidized journalists at the back were accusing us of being the reason that the scrum was canceled, accusing Keean, who's a very successful businessman in his own right, of still working for us, just continuing to get all the facts wrong. They said that an altercation that was incited and instigated by a Hill Times reporter right over there. He's right there. You'd see him in
the green.
Yeah, in the green with the mustache. Anyway, he just started screaming at Ezra at one point. And Ezra, you know, it's all on video. It's in a room full of 200 journalists. And they're still reporting it wrong because they think they can just get away with it. You know,
I've never seen behavior like that in my life.
It's the craziest thing. It's not even stuff that you would expect from a high school clique. It's the craziest, most unprofessional behavior I've ever seen in my life. And then when our team went outside, Terry Gillon.
Oh, really? Terry did it.
Terry did it. So our guys caught it on camera.
Terry, by the way, works for the Liberals. He's a Liberal media handler, right?
He works in the Prime Minister's office.
Okay.
And he assaulted me in Grassy Lakes when I tried to get close to Justin Trudeau. He body checked me about 6 years ago. I've never forgot about it. We used facial recognition to figure out who he was 6 years ago. Yeah. And ever since then, he's been one of the most notorious thugs defending the Liberal regime, the media enforcer, we call him, because he prevents anyone from getting close to Justin Trudeau and now his new boss, Mark Carney. So what happened to Lincoln outside?
So the guys were outside. They were sort of headed they're doing some work outside. And they saw Terry and they, you know, approached Terry. He smacked the camera, like smashed the camera once, and then did it again. And the last footage that I saw, because I'm sort of stuck in here trying to figure out what's going on, our guys were screaming for the police to come. And again, all the while, this room full of journalists is playing the victim. It's the most bizarre thing. I can't even, it feels like I'm in the Twilight Zone because these people are, you know, blaming us for the debate getting canceled. And we've been the victims of their bullying for 2 straight days.
It's been really a surreal experience. And I hope that the cameras caught that behavior.
Oh, I sure did.
Because it's, you know, the review of what happened here is going to be, it's going to take a lot to go through, and I think that we'll have some fingers to point at some of the just absolutely disgusting behavior of some of these alt-left.
They're unhinged. You're unhinged. I'm more like, I don't know how I'm going to get our people in here, out of here, given what just happened in the courtyard of CBC Radio Canada.
Wow. It's really unbelievable because like we're the ones that had the most to gain from the debate, given the fact that they don't let our organizations into any other political event with Mark Carney or Jagmeet Singh. You know, this is our opportunity. This is our one time we have a court-ordered paper saying that they have to let us in. And so it's funny that the legacy media are up in arms when they get to ask questions every day, right? Whereas it's independent media. This was obviously done to prevent the two of you and Ezra, who's behind you, and Alex Zoltan, who's probably somewhere in there as well. It was obviously done to prevent the 4 or 5, you know, independent-minded people who are not funded by the government in the entire room. And yet, you know, they turned it around on you. So how was it announced, and when did you find out that the scrum had been canceled?
I heard a leak from it was leaked earlier, and then at the end they came up to the mic and said it's canceled with absolutely no explanation. The rumors I heard was that Mark Carney wasn't going to tolerate this happening again, unconfirmed, and we can reach out to Mark Carney's campaign to confirm that. I'm sure they won't own up to it, but at the end of the day, this debates commission was created 3 election cycles ago to protect the regime, and it failed. And now they're going to be reviewing that. I mean, they're working in coordination with the Liberal government. Terry Keean was the president of the Parliamentary Press Gallery, and now the Parliamentary Press Gallery is in this room dealing with acting as staff here. So it's, you know, it's quid pro quo. It's absolutely corrupt, and frankly, it shouldn't exist anymore.
Well, it's interesting because if it were privately run and it was just run by the other media companies, I don't think that they would let independent media in either. I mean, you saw how the journalists behave. They hate you, right? Like you are the ones that are exposing the fact that they're bought and paid for press. And so in some odd way, having this government commission allowed us to come in. And so, you know, if the debate commission ends, again, it will be us and the independent media that bear the worst punishment. And you could just see that they are so desperately trying to hold on to their power in any way that they can. So, what's the plan next, Keean? What's your agenda?
I'll let Sheila go here. I just dragged her into this.
All right,
but,
thanks, Sheila. Thanks for your time. Good to see you.
Yeah, so I am actually going to go and try and find Pierre Poilievre. I don't know if I'll be successful in that, but I believe I know where he is right now. They're grabbing it after. I believe I know where they are, and I'm going to go try and ask him some questions. We'll see if it works out. If I find out where Mark Carney is, I'll try and do the same.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to find another way to get you to get your question to Mr. Carney. But thanks for your time, Keean. Appreciate it, and keep us updated if anything else happens over there.
Will do. Thank you.
Wow, that's really quite something. Just the way that they described how the journalists were behaving, like I don't want to say it seems like high school, but it just seems like. It does. But kind of worse than high school. I don't know. My high school was a bit friendlier than that. I don't think they were like rival gangs that were like at each other's throats and yelling and jeering. I do want to play this next clip because this is a clip, Sean, this is labeled as B, and Ezra Levant left and they were falsely reporting that he had his credentials revoked, and then he came back into the room and he's sort of like mobbed by this crowd of, I don't know if they're journalists or staffers. Maybe we can figure it out from this clip. But let's play this clip of Ezra Levant being mobbed in the media room behind the scenes of the Debates Commission.
What's the common ground? Well, I'm kidding around. We don't have common ground. I don't know what is. Yesterday, I think the independent journalists were a little bit too independent, and the regime journalists are too friendly with the regime. And I've seen a full court press by regime journalists over the last 24 hours to bring in limits to what independent journalists can do.
You mean third-party advertisers, Ezra? Can you talk about the $180,000 you're spending to do advertising, voter contact, both through For Canada and into Rebel News Network Limited?
See, you're wrong on that, and that's what concerns me, is that For Canada is a different group that was registered.
You paid $170,000 to Rebel News Network Limited. Is that not true?
You're getting your facts wrong, Justin, and I want to make sure you're careful.
Say to you?
We were actually talking about the CBC, who want us out of here. The CBC want us kicked out. We're not leaving. The CBC were outraged that Mr. Cormier let us in. The CBC had 4 questions yesterday. Rebel News had 4 questions yesterday.
So there was Ezra quite like calmly just sort of explaining, I guess what's happening, but it's so weird to have people kind of scrumming him. I think it was Justin Ling, like throwing all kinds of accusations at them. And it
I
really
love it.
has turned into like a turf war. I don't know.
I
What do
love
you
it.
think?
I love it. It's what happens when the bad guys start losing. You know, they've created a boring, singular, you know, easily pre-baked product that satisfies their paymasters. It's boring. They're losing. The Canadians don't trust it. No one watches it. It's tedious. It's fake authoritative. It's kind of sad. It's not interesting. It's not. No one's tuning in anymore. You know, generationally, they're appealing to people that grew up watching TV, and that's it. That's where they're at. And so yeah, what happened yesterday was a bunch of independent, enterprising, a little bit rebellious, younger, fun-loving criminal journalists who are independent broke in, asked a bunch of questions that people actually find interesting and are buzzing about. And the mainstream journalists lost their minds because they feel like they have a God-given right to control what Canadians think and talk about, and they don't. And the reason that they're acting violent, or in, you know, I don't know if I want to say violent, it's kind of, you know, battle of the nerds there, you know, it's the reason they're acting so aggressive is because they're losing power. But they're not just losing, like, this isn't just a moment. What they can sense is this is the end of a cartel, right? This is the beginning of the end. And it's like watching season 3 of Narcos, right? Like, you kind of know this is not going to end well for the people that were big shots at the beginning. It's all over, right? If there's anything like market forces in this, then these people are going to be out of a job. And they know it instinctively. Their instinct tells them these are bright people. And they can see that independent journalists are rumbling them on stories that they probably should have caught and didn't catch. They're asking questions that actually people are asking about. They're provoking a different narrative than the one that's accepted. If you went to journalism school, studied grievance studies in university, and know that there's a pro forma way to think and talk about everything that's acceptable if you did your undergraduate degree at Carleton and you decided that you needed to be not oppressed. And suddenly somebody comes along and they look like all the people that you think are supposed to be oppressed, like that lovely lady from Rebel News was asking Jagmeet Singh, and suddenly Jagmeet Singh, who thinks that he's, you know, always dealing with white racism, is suddenly dealing with somebody who's asking him a hard question about a phobia against Christianity and the burning of churches and the unjustified basis for that taking place, and the fact that he was silent on it. Those break all of his categories. But just as important, they break all the categories of all the people standing back in the back of the line, because the young woman asking that is straight out of central casting, somebody that they are supposed to say should feel oppressed and following the Carleton journalism narrative line. And she's not. She's actually defending something that a majority of Canadians want to see defended. She's forcing the debate of something the majority of Canadians want to see debated. And that's what free speech looks and feels like in the real world. It's kind of wild. It's kind of theatrical. It's kind of interesting. And it needs and demands a response. And if you're part of the old cartel that forever has been following some sad, pathetic, made in French universities in the 1960s, left critical school narrative that doesn't permit any alternative views, then what happens is you just got your house shaken down by that young journalist asking a guy who's so trapped by his ideology that he has to say she's the one that's got a misinformation problem. He refuses to respond to it. They know that film playing for anybody reasonable, rational, sane, that didn't go to Carleton Journalism School and learn that they're supposed to be aggrieved and oppressed and anti-colonial. It's everybody normal, the other 97% of Canadians, see something where somebody says, hey, this is interesting. 200 churches got burned down or were attacked with arson. And I want to understand why you won't call that out when you seem to be the person that's always most interested in addressing any sort of unusual attack or race or ethnic or religious based attacks. Why not? Suddenly that's a fascinating, suddenly politics got interesting again, right? You could tune into CBC for the next 6 months and never hear an interesting conversation like that, right? They're going to tell the same old story over and over again about the same old categories that everybody's supposed to care about under the CBC narrative. They won't hire her. She can't get a job at the CBC because she's not politically correct enough for them, right? And her independence, her entrepreneurship, her freedom of thought, her free speech just showed itself up. And that's what you see tonight. The meltdown, like calling the cops, putting, finding a little snowflake place with their safety blankets wrapped around them, the CBC, having their tents, having all their state funding. Our tax dollars paid for that entire array of heated tents and all that law enforcement. And it's all based on a sad narrative of a 1970s cartel that's losing their power. I absolutely love it. Everything that was illustrated on the stage 2 nights in a row and everything that was illustrated after the fact 2 nights in a row is showing that Canada has some hope.
I think you're completely right. And interestingly, Jamil Javanu, who is a conservative MP in Durham, he once worked for Bell Radio and he was a radio host, and he got fired and he actually sued them because the idea was basically that he's a black man, and so they wanted to bring on a black guy post like George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And so they gave him a radio show, and then it turned out he was pretty conservative and he had views that were anti-politically correct, like anti-PC sort of the dogma of the left. And one of the interesting things that's happened during the last 24 hours and since our questions were put to the leaders last night, David, is that basically they're saying that we're just like too outside the mainstream, and that independent media have an agenda. It's like, that conservatives used to be part of the mainstream media not too long ago. Even myself, I was a journalist in the legacy media. I wrote for the Toronto Sun. I worked for the Sun News Network. Before that, I was a talking head. I used to go on CTV, CBC, CP24. I did the rounds in Toronto, like circa 2011, 12, 13. Back then, they did have conservative voices. It was a conservative government in Ottawa. And it was a wider tent of what was acceptable in terms of discussion. And over the years, they've chipped away. They pushed it further and further and further to the left. They've ousted conservative voices. First, Ezra Levant was kicked out of the legacy media. And then they kept going, right? They came after people like Andrew Lawton, who was a longtime radio host in London, Ontario. And he got taken off air because he was pro-life. And they decided that you couldn't be pro-life in Canada and have a radio show, even though the radio was predominantly more of a conservative right-wing medium. They got rid of Jamil Javani. They got rid of me in the Toronto Sun. Like, they pushed more and more people. They got rid of Sue-Ann Levy from the Toronto Sun. They closed the door on conservatives and said, you're not welcome here anymore. And so rather than just what did they expect us to do? Just pack up our bags and go home? No. We care deeply about our country. We have a lot to say about it. We have a lot of ideas, and we want to continue to do our thing. And so you had Ezra Levant create the Rebel. I started True North. Keean Bexte started the Counter Signal. We merged those and came together, and we started Juno News just this year. But, we're going to continue our creative energy. We're going to keep pushing the needle. We're going to continue to do the journalism that matters, regardless of what they do, right? And if anything, we are totally disproving the entire narrative on which their funding model relies, which is that there's no business case for journalism in Canada, and therefore they need to go hat in hand to the government and get the media bailouts, get the newspaper bailouts, more funding for the CBC. Preston Manning in this election cycle wrote to the ethics commissioner and said, this is a conflict of interest. The party leader, the Liberal Prime Minister, is offering the CBC an additional $150 million in the middle of the campaign. That is a bribe. That is a bribe. Yeah. And the ethics commissioner just brushed it off and said, no, nothing to see here. Preston Manning's right. There is a serious problem in this country when it comes to the media and the government and that relationship. It is poisoned. And I think tonight was just another example, pretty much just that, we don't need the media, and they are dying and they're losing their hold over our country. I was hoping that this would be the first election where the legacy media didn't matter and they didn't determine the outcome. I worry that they still do have that control, as we saw the narrative switch
Sure.
and the polling numbers go for Mark Carney, and that is still the impact of the legacy media. So we still very much have our work cut out for us. We haven't
For
accomplished.
boomers.
I think, I don't think we've accomplished what
boomers.
Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly have been able to accomplish in Daily Wire in the U.S., where the legacy media just was not able to determine the outcome of that election. In Canada, we're still another 5 years behind. I don't know, but we're chipping away. And I think you're right. The boomers are like the last ones, and not all of them, because we have some fantastic boomers. I'm
You
sure
bet.
watching the stream right now and supporting us at Juno News. And so thank you to those watching. But
Those are the super boomers.
The super boomers.
Those are the ones that built the. No, I think what's happened is it's actually a medium. You know that Canadian theorist Marshall McLuhan wrote the medium is the message. It's actually pronounced massage, but I think his whole thematic was basically, or one core part of his theory was, when you get, there are these generational sort of tracks, right? So there are people that actually just read the newspaper, right? And there's people that are online, but there's generational mapping to that. And I think what's going on right now is people over 60 do rely very heavily on news media, but they also rely on a tacit promise that news media used to deliver, which was that there was going to be this endeavor to present to the greatest degree possible a sort of generically honest perspective or viewpoint of what's going on. And what's happened in the last 20 years isn't just that new media has come along, it's also been that journalism schools have become more and more radicalized along with the universities in general. And the idea of journalism has turned from being trying to report truth as you understand it from perspectives that might not be immediately evident to people, right? Which makes it interesting, to actually making it into an activist project. And unfortunately, like so many other activist projects, it's informed by a bunch of ideological theories that are rooted in left-wing assumptions about the nature of life and what's just, etc. And those play out. And when you threaten that, you see a bunch of journalists act like a bunch of campus radicals, because that's how they've been raised. They've been told this is all about an enterprise that's rooted in power. Knowledge is power. Information is core to knowledge. And so if somebody else starts to intervene in that exchange, right, they're a threat to you, and they're a threat to the activist project. And I love it. I think Canada needs a lot more of the nights like tonight, where you see somebody doing something crazy like shutting down the scrums because they can't take it, because the previous night independent media got questions in that Canadians actually found fascinating. And Candace, the project you're working on is going to go from strength to strength, because nothing is going in the other direction. Progressives love to sort of have this line about, oh yeah, it's just like, just watch. They're losing on the climate narrative now. That's fading fast. ESG was a big deal when I was in government, and Jason was the premier, and we were working hard. We had an ESG working group. We had to turn things around. We had to deal with Mark Carney's destructive influence in the UK. We had to reverse with HSBC and Barclays that bizarre attack on democracy-based energy assets only. They were allowed to do deals in Russia and Iraq, Iran, Saudi. But you see them
that was
losing.
one of the most bizarre things. Sorry to interject, but I never understood that. Like, I remember walking through Calgary Airport, and like the gangways were like wrapped with HSBC ads, and yet they had just announced that they were pulling out of all oil and gas projects. It's like, do you know like what that means? Like, why are you advertising in Calgary? You might as well just pull out of the city entirely, because it was just so out of touch. And at that point, I felt like, wow, like the world is moving in a very dangerous direction very fast. I think you're right, though, that the mood has changed. Like, you could even see it in the debate tonight. Like, usually the conservative leader, whoever it is, would be hit over the head from all angles. Like, why don't you have a better plan? What's your plan to reduce emissions? Tonight, actually, I thought that Pierre Poilievre owned that issue. And I don't think that I've seen a conservative own that issue in at least a decade, maybe longer. I mean, I don't think they've ever owned the issue. But Pierre's point about how he would get LNG and he would get energy exports to get countries like India off of coal. That was, again, that was the point. Like at that point, no one could say anything, and he completely won that issue. Sorry to interrupt you. I know you were making a different point, so you can go ahead.
No, I think that's exactly the point. The point is the progressive idea that their theory or their ideology is going to continue to sort of evolve in a ever larger, they're going to capture hearts and minds over time, and that eventually the outcome towards a big state solution is inevitable. This is failing with respect to the narrative around ESG and climate. Conservatives are now on the rise on climate, because actually the conservative solution is let's remove 2.5 times our entire national carbon footprint by shipping our LNG to the coal-based economies that need it so badly and could be cleaned up and want it, right? What do the Liberals say to that? They've had 10 years. First 4 years, emissions went up on their watch. Well, they did all these, made all these moves to degrade our ability to go to capital markets. Same thing's happening with legacy media. The model that Canada has embraced under the Liberal Party the last 10 years has bell bottoms on it from the 1970s. This is not an economic model that can work. The only way it works right now is they take taxpayer dollars, which in Canada, unfortunately, is debt. They give it away to their favorite media organizations to stay in line. Then they spend taxpayer dollars, debt, on huge advertising budgets that get given to the same legacy media as another form of funding that also re-endorses government messages to their own citizens through advertising revenue. And then if that doesn't work, that the two carrots don't work, the stick is, we're not going to give you access to the government and the stories you want to write about us unless you stay in line. You do the wrong thing, you don't get to talk to the minister. And that's the quid pro quo. And that model is not only fading because it's not interesting, because it leads to boring media that doesn't question all the narratives that people actually want to see questioned. It's also failing because it's unethical. It's wrong. Right. It doesn't work. Right. It doesn't respond to where people want to go.
And we know this happens. Like, we have so many examples of this, but one that always kind of stands out. So right after the trucker convoy, suddenly the entire narrative switched to everyone had to support Ukraine in this war with Russia. And regardless of views on that, Chrystia Freeland came out, and she is a Ukrainian nationalist, like incredibly pro-Ukraine. And someone sent me a picture of her carrying a scarf that was basically considered to specifically like people in the Polish community to be like a Nazi scarf. It was like a scarf from the party that had collaborated with the Nazis back in World War II. So anyway, we were reporting on it. And basically the entire legacy media, instead of reporting on what we had exposed, started reporting like attacking us. And it was like, it was so coordinated and it was so strange, right? The one outlet that didn't do that was, I believe it was iPolitics. And it was actually, the article that was written was by Rachel Emanuel back when she still worked in the legacy media. And she kind of painted a much fairer picture. And so then anyway, what happened was that her editor made her take down the piece and changed it. And the reason was because Chrystia Freeland's office had called and basically threatened them and yelled at them and said, how dare you publish this? You better take it down. You know where your bread is buttered, more or less. And so they changed it. Rachel Emanuel quit out of outrage, like principle, exactly, because it was like, how can you just like the government had a narrative, you can't go against it, end of story. And she kind of like saw the inside of like, you know, how the sausage is made, and turned her against legacy media. But that's kind of like a regular occurrence. It's like, you will repeat the narrative, or there will be consequences. And Ottawa is a pretty small town. And, you know, if you lose access, you kind of lose your bloodline, right? Like, if you're a journalist, you need access. You need to kind of keep people happy, appease them. And the Liberals use that. They've weaponized it. They've kind of professionalized weaponization through the funding and through all these other measures. And so as much as some of these reporters may pretend to be independent, maybe at one point they were, you know, over time, over the last 7-8 years of the Trudeau government playing this game, you know, it's so clear they have them under the thumb. Okay, we have this clip that Keean and Sheila were referencing earlier. So this is David Menzies from The Rebel, and he is outside the leaders' debate. And you can see, caught on tape, Terry Gillion, who is, like they said, the lead media advance person for Prime Minister Mark Carney. Had previously been that role for Justin Trudeau. lashes out and gets violent. So let's play that clip. Do we have the clip?
The walkway, and I think we have the tape for you right now, because the Liberal bus was on René Lévesque Boulevard, which is just the street behind the camera here. And so as they were going out, they were being followed by some of those, as I mentioned, I called them earlier, some of those so-called journalists from Rebel News. And as they were walking out towards security, they were being hounded by them, being filmed by them. And these are just journalists who are trying to get back to the hotel tonight, as there are no more scrums. And at that moment, you'd seen this clash between one of the members of Rebel News, and it seems like somebody from the Liberal Party. It continued to spill out.
Okay, so I'm told that was one of the clips. I think we might be able to get one that shows a better angle that the Rebel themselves put up. It's kind of hard to see what was going on there. I believe that was David Menzies in the white hat. But
that's his signature.
Yeah, and I mean, things seem to have gotten really, really tense. I don't know how else to describe that. We're just trying to sort out whether we have this other clip here. I don't know. What did you think of that, David?
Well, I think in like on principle, I don't like it too much when journalists make themselves the center of the story. I think. And I think some of this is sort of a tempest in a teapot. But what I think it's evidence of is regime media is starting to lose its hold, and all of the anger and fury underlying some of the actions that are taking place, multiple different ways, is based on this. I think the desire to go after the debate commissioner and others is because they sense they're losing control. They deserve to. One of the effects, if you look back at one of the points you were referencing with Chrystia Freeland, I wrote an article that the National Post agreed to post once I provided in triplicate all of the source material for it, which was Chrystia Freeland, our soft on terror deputy prime minister. And I pointed out that she was at the heart of the decision to pay off Omar Khadr, the terrorist who had murdered a U.S. Army medic and grievously injured another one, whose life was saved by them. And then they decided to go in an extrajudicial process to pay this guy. And Chrystia was at the heart of that, but that wasn't reported by people, and I was stunned by that. And then she had made the decision to use FinTrack, terror tracking legislation, to shut down the businesses and freeze the bank accounts of Canadian citizens. Total violation of civil rights, found to be so by the courts, of course, afterwards. And the thing that had prompted me to finally write it, because I'm not a journalist, of course, I'm somebody, but I do a lot overseas. I've got some good friends in security business, and I was stunned that we had still allowed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to operate in Canada. I could not believe that was still happening. And it was actually David Menzies, who we just saw in that clip with his white hat, was pushed up against a wall and then arrested when he had the temerity to ask Chrystia Freeland. And that was the final straw for me. So for me, that was strike three. So I finally I sat down, I typed it out, I found all the reference points, found the legal documentation, I found the court cases. And the National Post said, this is a big deal, what you're saying here, you've got to justify it, justified it. And they were great about it. They printed it, and she lost her mind. Her office lost her mind, but she was frozen in place. She was not allowed to leave. She didn't attend question period for 2 weeks after that. They were scared senseless that this Omar Khadr case was going to be asked about. I'd done the work. I'd phoned lawyers that were involved at the time in the Conservative Party previously. And here's the thing that I found so interesting. So I am not a journalist. I'm a guy that had a laptop, and I was furious after the IRGC thing. I'm like, this is unconscionable. This is the world's worst terrorist supporters. I knew they were sponsoring Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, because I've traveled a lot internationally. I'm engaged on some of those issues. The fact that Canada as a G7 was permitting this to happen, and the same person permitting that to happen and refusing to tell Canadians why she was permitting it to happen. And I knew from some of my American security buddies that Canada was the worst on enforcing any rules against criminal and terror syndicates and their money laundering operations, including direct IRGC operations in Toronto that were allowed to go on, right? So it's like I'd had it. So I was calling that out. And it just occurred to me, where is our media on this stuff? This woman is our deputy prime minister. She's effectively financially illiterate, right? She did not know the difference between net and gross debt. She kept repeating the wrong facts about G7 and our net debt to GDP, which is a senseless fact. It makes no difference to our actual
And it
debt
never
position.
included sub-sovereign debt too. That always bothered me.
No,
It's like
never
this is cherry-picked.
sub-sovereign. It included a discount for all of our pensions, which is extraordinarily large part of the whole thing was just fraudulent from the get-go. It was a talking point she was probably given that she could use. She's somebody that studied Slavonic studies, which I think 8 people do, and sort of made her name in that stuff, which is fine, connected to her Ukrainian heritage, which is fine. And actually, her first books that she wrote, I really liked elements of that and in her discussion of the sort of post-Soviet Russia. But here's somebody who was getting away with something that was absolutely unconscionable, soft fascism, live. The world was watching Canada turn into a place they couldn't believe with the freezing of people's citizens' bank accounts.
It's still
Should
happening.
never have happened.
It's still happening. It happened to Meghan Murphy this week. She said that the government said to freeze her bank account, Van City, and it was the day she got named as a candidate. Sorry to interrupt you. You know, it's interesting that you said that she got net debt and gross debt mixed up. Today in the debate, I just remembered that Mark Carney was talking about the Keystone. I think he meant to say Northern Gateway, but he repeated it twice, that the Canadians own Keystone, which that's not.
I think it's on his mind. We will hopefully soon. I'm glad he's thinking that. You know, if you adopt enough conservative policies, you probably start to mix up which ones are ours and which ones are theirs. You know, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay,
I
think he's probably going to back Keystone soon.
I want to go back to this clip because we do have this other angle of this confrontation with David Menzies outside the outside the leadership debate with this Liberal staffer. So if we can play that now, please.
Oh, Terry Gillen! Hey! What are you doing? Terry Gillen!
What are you gonna? Bro, you guys are out. You touched me with that.
No!
I did not touch you. Sir. You're a liar. You're a goddamn liar.
You're a liar.
Oh yeah, nice try, guys. You just hit me. Look what you're doing. Police.
No, the police is backed by the Liberal.
Whoa, that was much more intense than I thought. Things are getting real there. Very angry, Terry Gillen. You can see that he smacked it looked like that there was a selfie stick that David Menzies was holding, and you could see him whip it out of his hand. And then Menzies confronts him, and he does it again, and he smacks someone else's phone out of the hand. You know, I'll say this again. I've said this on my show a few times, David. This is not what a winning campaign looks and acts like, right? Like, you would think that the Liberals, with a pretty comfortable lead in many of the polls, that they would be at ease, that Mark Carney would be confident on the debate stage, that the staffers around him would be, happy and positive. Instead, what we see Buttongate. We see them dropping off fake buttons at the Conservative campaign, trying to frame them to look Trumpian and pro-Trump. Mark Carney wasn't projecting any kind of confidence whatsoever on the stage last night or tonight. And there you have their lead media person getting violent. I would describe that as violent with the press. I don't think things are going well for Team Liberal. I think the wheels have come off that campaign. I think that the lead that they enjoyed is running out. They know that they have a lousy candidate, and they're just hoping and praying that they can run out the clock and that Canadians won't notice. I think that the reason that they had these scrums canceled is because they couldn't risk another night that went as badly for Mark Carney as last night. They couldn't risk more of the viral clips going all over social media, showing Mark Carney totally incapable of answering difficult questions or answering questions that he wasn't previously prepared for, and that they're panicking.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing of tonight's debate, one of the things that I took a note on was, I thought that the narrative was going to be Pierre is like Trump, right? That's what they were going to keep trying to do. Pierre's like Trump, Pierre's like Trump. Didn't really play out. What was interesting was the narrative became Mark is like Justin. Mark Carney is like Justin Trudeau, which is different. And I think that their campaign is sort of surprised at the fact and wasn't prepared for the fact that this was going to be the way they take them on, because I think they've been so scripted around. I've dealt with a crisis again. Mr. Blanchet came out and just said, "What have you actually done? What have you actually negotiated? What crisis have you actually personally dealt with? I don't see any evidence of this." Right? And in that sort of inimitable kind of French Canadian way, where I wasn't sure where he was going, the first half of his statement, then he would finish quite strongly with, I don't see any of this being true. And actually was quite kind of telling, and the point that I think Pierre drove home is, you are no different than Justin Trudeau. And I don't see the difference. And I could tell, it just seemed like Mark Carney wasn't prepared to he could have said, "I am a different person." Now, here's what's interesting. You know who set that narrative up?
Keean.
Keean, the night before, did a great job with a very simple question, saying, how do you rate Justin Trudeau as a prime minister? And why, if it's different, is everybody else the same? And I think that, Juno News can take a little bit of credit for one of the key talking points actually coming out in the debate. There's a real symmetry in that engagement of that first question that Keean asked, and the conversation that took place between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. And I think that it's a very important point, which is, this is the same cast of characters. You've changed the front man. The lead singer is slightly different, but the tone is the same, the style is the same, the backup band is identical, and they're going to bring you another 4 years. It's going to be the fourth quarter of these guys. I think that what his handlers have to be very worried about after the French debate is they're going to lose enough seats in Quebec now, where at best they're hoping for a very thin minority government, and there's a chance that the Conservatives can take the mantle back on this race. And after tonight's debate, it wouldn't surprise me if you started to see Pierre by 2 or 3. The problem the Conservatives still have, though, is the efficiency of the distribution of these votes. It's always been our problem. And that's going to remain a big problem. And it's going to come down to what's going to happen in Ontario in that 905. And it's also going to come down to how strong will the base turnout be? And the response to the rallies tells me it could be strong. And how strong will the motivation of the Liberal Party voter be? In other words, when you see these polls measure preferences, but preferences don't mean that you're going to go vote in the rain, right? And that's a really important distinction. So the base has to be fired up. And I think tonight, which we talked about beforehand, Pierre did a good job of saying things in a manner that got his base thinking, that's me he's talking about. I'm tired of the last decade of the past 10 years. I'm going to go actually make the time to vote. And I think so Mark Carney, Prime Minister Carney, could have a lot of tacit support reflected in polls, which are just, show me which of these two people you prefer more, which is a preference. People can do that in a second and be done with it. But actually going out and voting is a different thing, and your base has to be really fired up to do it. And I think, if the boomers start to fade on Mark Carney, he's losing everything. And that's what I hope happens, but we'll see.
Well, it's interesting that he just seemed like unprepared. And you made such a good point that the theme that you would think that the Liberals would really try to hammer home was this idea that Pierre Poilievre is just like Trump. That's what they have been pushing on social
media. I thought
media.
that's what tonight would be all about, and it didn't really come out at all.
And to me, I never saw it, right? There's really nothing there. Like, just on paper, right? Donald Trump is older. He's a businessman. He's from New York. He's very brash. He's kind of infamously like a womanizer and is on his third wife. And just his style, right? Like, comparing that to Pierre Poilievre, who is younger. I think he's a Gen Xer. It's just like, there's just nothing there. And so to make the point that they didn't talk about that at all. They didn't try to make the connection, because to any fair Canadian watching, it would just sort of fall patently false, in my opinion. It works when you don't really know Pierre Poilievre and you haven't heard him and you haven't seen him, when you're just like kind of imagining generic conservative. But once you get to know him and once you see him on stage, I just don't think that narrative falls. And it makes me think of, they were each allowed one-on-one session, right? So the debate, I really like this part where each individual debater got to choose one question to ask of another person. And everybody obviously went against Mark Carney. And so Mark Carney was getting it all way. And then last went to Mark Carney and he said, okay, who are you going to ask a question of? And it was like, you had 4 sessions to think about it in your head, right? While everyone else is coming up with their question, you're the last one. So you get an advantage actually, because you get to see what everyone else has done. So you
Yeah.
would think by the time it came to him, he would have had come up with something, but he hadn't, right? And he just said, okay, I'll ask a question of myself. And then he started talking, and then he said, okay,
Bizarre.
no, actually, I'll ask this question of Pierre. And what did he do? He went to like his debunked conspiracy theory, this ridiculous idea that Pierre Poilievre hadn't gotten his security clearance, which he had to have known that Pierre actually has a very good explanation for this. And yes,
Yeah.
Thomas Mulcair has come out in support of him, the former NDP leader and leader of the opposition, said, of course, Pierre is right and he shouldn't have a security briefing because then it would preclude him from commenting on the matter. And his job as the loyal minister or the loyal opposition leader is to comment on these things. So no, he shouldn't get it. And so what did Mark Carney do? He gave Pierre Poilievre the prime time moment to debunk his own stupid claim. So I just, to me, it was just like, he's just really bad at this, like from a strategic perspective.
Well,
it was like, wow.
I actually think that something unbelievable happened. I think their overreach on the Pierre is Trump that happened with these buttons that they printed, I think this came right from the top. And the reason I think it came right from the top is you don't just have buttons ready to go, 16 hours after your leader has just announced that he thinks that some Canadian parties are repeating American slogans. And then suddenly, straight out of the Liberal War Room, American slogan buttons are left all over the Canada Strong and Free network. And they have op-eds ready to go. And all of it gets busted by, credit where credit is due,
CBC.
a CBC reporter who's overhearing in a bar and just says this is the dirty tricksters. This is wrong. This is unethical. And this is obviously an attempt to entrap. I think what that meant was if Mark Carney tried to go there and say, your problem is you're like Trump, he would have been like, is that the button you printed, Mark? Is that what you guys are all about? Like, I think they actually foiled themselves by taking it too far, trying so hard to make it about this planted evidence. And I think that really turned people off, right? Anybody that sort of follows politics is kind of turned off. This, by the way, is the kind of stuff that makes people stay home and just kind of hold their nose and be like, yeah, I like Mark Carney better than I like Pierre Poilievre because Pierre's young and Mark's older and looks like a safe pair of hands and a boomer. But you know what? This weird button printing stuff, juvenile delinquency, you didn't even fire the guy. You didn't fire the Chinese guy with the bounty on a dissident. You got another Chinese guy that went to a PLA military parade, which is like, what is wrong with this guy? Like, I'm out. And I think that those missteps in a campaign actually meant they couldn't play the card that they'd been setting up to play, which was going to be all about, and I think this debate probably would have been all about, you're just like Trump, here's how. This is what you said, this is what Trump said. This is the way you acted, this is what Trump did. Right? I think they were ready for that narrative. And I think Mark Carney went in with a glass half full in this debate because his own team trying to make this big tie-in between Trump and Pierre didn't work. I also thought that there was this tone deafness to his closing statement, which was, we're in a crisis. This is the worst crisis of our lives. This is Trump. Like, he returned to this Trump theme, but it suddenly sounded a little tone deaf. It sounded like that wasn't where everything had gone. All the conversations around affordability, the energy crisis, why won't you get rid of C-69? Like, none of it's really adding up.
It was so clear that all of our problems are within, right? It's like everything we just spoke about for 2 hours points to dysfunction and a complete lack of management from the Liberals.
And even Jagmeet Singh didn't have any. And so none of the usual suspects were able to play this thing that for 3 long months, elbows up, all this weird stuff. Did you notice that ad came up from 22 Minutes that they've kind of mocked the elbows up?
I saw that. Yeah.
I mean, there's a shift in this narrative. And I think part of it was this button thing. I think everybody now feels like, okay, I don't have to pretend to hate America all day long anymore. I can actually poke a little bit of fun at the idea that, these two geriatrics are.
We can plan a trip to Florida. We can go back to the
Well, we need a Canadian dollar that doesn't fall apart.
That's true. I want to read. I've got some super chats here I want to read. So I forgot to read these earlier. Thank you so much, folks. It's so wonderful that you chip in. So Thumper Dude just gave us $28. Appreciate that. What else? Let me just try to see if I can catch up on them. LP says boomer for PP. I guess a lot of people in the chat were calling themselves super boomer after your comment there, David. So that might catch on. Let me go back to the earlier ones here. We had Stefano, same as last night, $139. Thank you so much, Stefano. You are wonderful. He writes, appreciate what you're doing to revise real journalism. Go, Pierre. Climate emergency is a joke. Let's just look at the record. Acid rain, ozone layer, coastal areas flooding, doom which never happens, all a hoax to abuse our liberties. Tend to agree. We got another $139 super chat from Emma V. She says, thank you for your coverage. Thank you, Emma. That was so generous. We really appreciate it.
Great.
And Astrofane, $25 without a comment. So someone sent me this, David, and I just had to play it on air, and I had to show it to the audience and to you to get your reaction. Andrew Coyne, our foe over at the CBC, he was on the At Issue panel. I guess they hosted it. Rosemary with her walls of security and her heated tent. He predicts the death of the independent media.
I bet he does. I bet he does.
Let's play the clip and then we can react to it. Do we have that clip? I think they're just looking for it. Let's go to that clip, guys, if we have it. If not, I could just do my best to try to describe it. Let me just see if they have it here. Maybe not.
Well, it's great. Look, expect that theme from Andrew and a bunch of others.
Yeah, I don't think they know our audience very well. I think that this kind of thing really just fires up the base and makes people more interested in what we're doing. I think that we got great questions last night. It felt like a big victory for independent media and free speech in Canada. Tonight, they tried to shut us down. And I think that that's okay. We'll persevere. Our clips will still, going viral from yesterday, we're still covering the debate and the substance of it here on the live stream. And to us, it's not all about us, right? Like, we go there to do a job. We want to report. We want to ask the questions. If they don't let us, okay, we'll move on. We'll go on to the next day of our coverage. We have a full team of reporters who are writing news stories day in and day out. I'm doing a live show every day. Keean Bexte is making videos as well, traveling around the country. Like, we're going to continue to do our thing.
Look,
our audience appreciates it. They're not going to just suddenly leave us because Andrew Coyne predicted it on the CBC.
Not only that, Stefano just gave $139 to watch Keean ask a question about the difference between Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, and that comes up in a debate the day after. That's why you have independent journalism, because it raises the questions people have on their minds in a way that is compelling enough that the next Prime Minister of Canada repeats it on a debate stage and makes it a key point of, what he thinks is critical to defending the Canadian interest. It's a phenomenal night. The fact that they canceled it is actually an amazing signal. The fact that guys like Andrew Coyne are trying to declare the end of independent media, he's sort of he's sort of a guy still selling fax machines. It's going to be tough to admit that, it's this newfangled thing called the internet is going to result in democratization of ideas. And I have huge respect for the journalistic enterprise and actually for Andrew. I just disagree with him on a lot of his opinions, but I think he's a hardworking and smart guy. But I think that this dogma around independent media is actually just a defensive posture. I don't think it has anything to do with the actual content that's going out. I love the fact that there's an insurgency of smart, bright, committed people that are asking hard questions. It's great for the country.
Well, that's wonderful. Sorry, folks, we don't have this clip, so I'm just going to retweet it. If you really want to see it, head to my X profile, Candace Malcolm, and you will see I just retweeted it. Stephen Taylor originally posted it. All right, David, well, I've kept you up long enough. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us. This was fun, and I do regret the fact that we didn't get our questions. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to question the leaders again, but that's okay. We'll soldier on. We're happy warriors, and we will find another way to get our questions in front of our political leaders. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the super chats. Thanks to all the subscribers, everyone who pays and supports independent media. We really appreciate it. Consider heading on over to junonews.com and buying a subscription. If you support what we do, if you want to disprove Andrew Coyne's prediction that this will be the death of the independent media, let's prove him wrong. Let's continue to grow and build the future and provide an alternative for the tens of millions of Canadians who don't see themselves reflected in the CBC. All right, folks, thanks so much. Have a wonderful evening. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'll be doing my regular show in the morning, and it's Good Friday and Easter weekend, so we'll go into that holiday as well, although it's sort of a somber day, Good Friday. As I try to explain to my kids, it's not necessarily a good day. Good Friday isn't good, but it is good in the end because we know what happens. But anyways, thank you so much, folks. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'm Candace Malcolm. Thank you and God bless.